We'll get started, and please ignore the beep. Please stand for the pledge and remain standing. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Remain standing for a moment of silence, please. Roll call, please.
Mayor Dickey,
Here.
Vice Mayor Magazine, Councilmember Friedel, Councilmember Grzybowski,
Present.
Councilmember McMahon, here. Councilmember Charno, present. Councilmember Spellich.
Present.
Thank you all. We're just going to change the agenda up a little bit tonight. We're going to start with the noise ordinance part, but then we're going to skip, so that's when we get to the regular agenda. That's 8A. Then we're going to go to 8G and H, the fee waiver policy, and then the community center and event fee waiver policy. So that's the only change, I think. Good. Our first item is reports by mayor, council members, and town manager. Grady?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, I have no report for you this evening.
Oh, come on, Sharon.
I had a light couple of weeks. I went to the Jazzercise ribbon cutting with you, as a matter of fact, as well as attended, we had a Biophilic Cities virtual meeting yesterday to talk about the next steps after the CSEC approval last month. So we hope to be on council agenda maybe in January. And we also had last week the last class of the 2021 Leadership Academy. Tomorrow night is the graduation and presentation of the projects. So class 4 is very excited to have this under our belt. So now class 5 will be in charge of planning next year's.
Well, they have a hard act to follow. Just a few things. We had our East Valley Mayor's meeting, and this time it was in Scottsdale. There was the flutter at the Fountain Hills Gives for the Community Foundation, which I understand raised quite a bit. I was proud of my sister there. She did one of the butterflies. Fountain Hills Medical Center had a briefing for many of us, and then I was able to bring greetings to the Boys and Girls Club auxiliary fundraiser. Mayor of Paradise Valley and Mayor Ortega were there. It was a really nice, and also they raised a lot of money, so for a very good cause. Our first item is recognition of Outgoing Community Services Advisor Commissioner Chairman Amy Arnold, and since we only have one this time, I'm going to come down and read it to you if that's good. What your colleague said about you. Hello, is that working? Yes. Okay, you ready?
I am ready.
All right, tonight we'd like to recognize Amy Arnold, who was appointed to the Community Services Advisory Commission by the Town Council on January 16th, 2018. She served as the chair of the commission and has been a vocal supporter of events, historical preservation, and town projects. Her dedication and ardent support to the commission and the town of Fountain Hills has been evident by her many hours of volunteer service and is sincerely appreciated by the council, her fellow commissioners, and all of the town residents. Thank you so much, Amy. Would you like to say a couple of things? I always put them on the spot.
I just want to say thank you. It was a great opportunity. I really enjoy being on the commission, and I would definitely do something like that in the future.
Well, we look forward to it. Thank you so much. Thank you. We have another pleasant item here, which is Scheduled public appearances, the recognition of a $27,000 donation from ADOG. Grady?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm very thrilled to make this formal announcement. This recently occurred. ADOG announced through Denise Dunning-Ricketts, the president of ADOG, which is the Fountain Hills Association of Dog Owners Group, that they wish to donate $27,000 towards the cost of purchase and installation of a structure in the Desert Vista Dog Park. With us tonight is Denise Ricketts, who has probably a few words to say, but we're very, very appreciative of ADOG and your efforts on this part.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. We want to thank you very, very much for all that it is that you do for the dog park and the dog park community. We recognize that we are not always the first on your list of priorities. However, we know that for a lot of the residents, their dogs are very important family members. And so, if we continue to try to plow through to make it a healthier and safer place, we think that these $27,000, which was donated by an anonymous donor who said that he believes very strongly in the mission and the vision of ADOG and wanted to help us in supporting that. So, for especially all the seniors who come to the dog park, this is going to be much of a blessing for them and places to sit and to have shade. So anyway, I thank you all very much for your support.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're happy that they invited us, and Jerry and Sharon and Rachel and I got to their board meeting, and it's nice to be able to recognize you publicly, so thank you so much. Our next item is a financial audit results presentation. Grady?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. As you are aware, under state law, it is required for us to each year undergo a financial audit. And that's just good governance, and it's a good thing. It's very transparent, and it's something that we do every year. And we usually come out of it with either flying colors, or sometimes there might be some recommendations for further suggested changes in operations and such. With us tonight, we have Joshua Jumper, who is the audit manager. Not only is he the audit manager with Heinfeld, Meach and Company, but he also oversaw this year's audit and was actually boots on the ground, he and his staff. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Jumper.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. It's my pleasure to be here. I am happy to present the results of the annual audit for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. I believe you have all your information in your agenda packets. It is quite a lot of information, so I'll go over the high levels, the most important parts, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have along the way. The main report issued was the annual comprehensive financial report, which includes the audit opinion on the annual financial statements. I'm pleased to report that the opinion was unmodified, and in layman's terms, that means a quote-unquote clean opinion. So great news. That financial report is quite lengthy and includes quite a lot of financial information. If you're looking for digestible information in that report, I'd point you to the management discussion and analysis section, and then the statistical section in the back, which includes historical information, oftentimes 10 years worth of information. So lots of financial data in there. I won't touch on anything specifically, but our audit opinion date was November 4th. Additionally, another report issued as part of the annual audit, the expenditure limitation report, which is another state required report. Pleased to report that the town is under its expenditure limit. as it has been every year. Additionally, a new report issued this year for the town was the single audit reporting package. That is required when governmental entities spend over $750,000 of federal awards. So this was the first time the town has had that required in quite some time due to the award for the AZ Cares. 2.9. Additionally, in that report is where we would note any internal control deficiencies. I'm happy to report there were none. Finally, there's a communication to governments that includes required information. There were no difficulties encountered during the audit. There were no audit adjustments required. We had no disagreements with management. And that is included in your packet. Exciting stuff. Happy to answer any questions you have on the various reports issued.
Thank you. Questions? Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thanks for your report. The difference on the unrestricted has gone up, I don't know, 3 or 4 million. Is that because of the CARES Act?
Good question. Unrestricted net position?
Yeah.
That would not be the cause because the revenues came in and then were expended in the same fiscal year, so the net effect would be 0.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. To be next.
Continued, huh? Thank you. Any questions or comments from anyone? You know, I wanted to say that if you look at the beginning part with the introductory area, it's a good accounting, pardon my phrase, for other things like development and other activities in town. I have one question, sorry.
problem.
It's a chart. It's on page 22 in our group of, and it's about development, and it says it has year from 1998 to 2020, and then it goes over single family, duplex, multifamily, commercial, and then there's an other. And I don't know, Grady, do you know what that is, what the other is? Because if it wasn't hardly anything, I would ignore it, but there's a lot there. Unless it's a total.
Yeah, I don't know offhand, Mayor, but it could be those that were not major categories, which could be just home improvement, additions, those types of
okay.
things.
So not like a whole
Yeah, and
complete
if
building.
my recollection, it wasn't a very large number associated with that other.
Well, it's a lot. That's quite, I would have ignored it, but it seems like a lot, so it's a good thing, but I don't know what it is.
No, I was referring to the both the revenue and also the number of those actual.
Well, we can ask. I don't know who created.
I think it would be best for the staff. I'll tell you what, we will definitely get back to you in the council and
Thank
give
you.
you an answer rather than me trying to answer off the cuff on that.
Other than making something up, good. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
All right. And next up, I think, is going to be David for our revenue update.
That's right. David Pock, our finance director, will give a presentation on our first quarter fiscal year 22 revenue update. Council, you recall that about a year ago, we started doing these updates primarily because of the pandemic, and council they actually requested this of staff. So I think it's been a really good exercise both for David and myself, but also for the council to keep your eye on the ball, so to speak, and see how things are going financially for the town. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Pock, who has a prepared presentation for you. Mr. Pock?
So, yeah, we might answer both of those questions. I'll try to definitely answer yours, Councilman. The other one, I might have to go back and dig into the worksheet and see what's going on. Yeah, I think this information is helpful, especially when it's good information. It makes it a lot easier to stand up here. So yes, as Josh just mentioned, our audit's been finalized. As far as last year, just a summary, our revenues were just about 3 million over what was expected, what we had budgeted. That's good news, right? Our expenditures were 2.3 less than what was budgeted. So that's about just over $5 million to the good for us. Those year-end fund balances are available in the report that were attached for the audit. As far as year-end fund balances, after we satisfy our reserve requirements and make the transfers that we've budgeted for the current fiscal year, for fiscal year 22, that leaves 3.8 million going to the capital projects fund for next year's capital projects. As far as the unrestricted fund balance that was asked about, Josh is correct. We received the AZ CARES money into the grant fund. That money was used for public safety invoices. That obviously saved money in the general fund that we didn't have to spend out of the general fund. So that goes indirectly towards building that unrestricted fund balance. All right, so that's just a brief overview of last year. Now we're just going to talk about the first 3 months of this year, the first quarter. Overall, it's great news. Most of our TPT, we matched our budgeted amounts. We did see some really strong year-over-year increases in the restaurant and bars, as well as the services, which includes the hotels, vacation rentals, golf course, that type of thing, which is good because they were lagging a little bit last year due to the pandemic and travel. So as far as state shared revenues, the income tax revenue is down slightly than what we thought it was going to be, and that was due to the census that came out in 2020. The first 2 months of the fiscal year, the DOR didn't have those census numbers, so they used the numbers from last year. Once they did get the census numbers, they were lower than what they had anticipated or what was in 2019 calculation, so it went down a little bit, so you'll see a little dip in that later. Other than that, all the other three state shared revenues are in line with our budget. So, as far as TPT, taxable activity, this is every taxable activity that occurred in the town. We had $126 million in activity. That's a $1 million increase compared to last year for the first quarter.
Can I ask you a question about that? So
Sure.
you mean like a total? So, because if
Right.
you look at the line, it doesn't look that way, but if you're going from July through now, then that's where you get that?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you took the area below the yellow or above the yellow line and below the dark blue line, that's going to be $1 million over. Uh-huh. So as far as the total TPT collections, the town's portion of that, we had budgeted about 3.5 million. We collected 3.6, $140,000 more than our budget, and an increase of about 130,000 compared to last year. Then we start breaking it down by category. Retail sales, you can see, is basically mirroring that of last year. Overall, it was $100,000 less than what we had anticipated, but it was still an increase of 45,000 compared to last year. Pretty stable category. What's not stable is construction. As you can see, it's kind of just all over the place. We are less than we had anticipated by 27,000, and also decreased from last year with $118,000 less. Pretty boring graph, pretty stable. Utilities and communications, we actually had 150,000 more than what we had expected, and a decrease of 8,000 compared to last year. This category also includes the internet services, so I expect it to be a little bit less than last year because people aren't stuck at home relying on Zoom calls and that sort of thing. So, real estate, again, pretty stable. It's long-term residential rentals and commercial rentals. 26,000 less than what we have budgeted, but an overall increase of 10,000 compared to last year. And then restaurants and bars, you can see it's a real strong performer for the first quarter, well above any other year. So we collected $63,000 more than what we had budgeted, and also a $79,000 increase for over the 3 months compared to last year. Services looks a little drastic, but if you remember, we had a fairly mild summer. I'm thinking it wasn't too awful, so I think people are ready to get away and get traveling, so I think that's why we had such a big jump in July. The July number, the collections in July are actually for June activity, so we had 73,000 more than what we had budgeted and 121,000 more than last year. And then our state shared revenue. On the left, sales tax. Obviously, we're having good sales activity across the state with an increase. We collected $793,000. And then the only activity that you'll probably ever see on the income tax is that little dip in September. It's just going to level off at that new amount and finish out the year. At least it'll make that graph a little more exciting for the years to come. The HERF fund, or HERF revenues, we collected $458,000. That was more than what was expected, so we're glad to see that. That's from fuel taxes. And then the vehicle license tax is basically right in line with what we had thought, so no surprises there. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Vice Mayor?
David, it looks to me like at this point we're in really very good shape.
Yes.
I don't
Very
know.
happy.
I don't know if this question is answerable, but when you go through all this, any idea what the net would be?
At the end of this year?
Well, based
I
upon this.
mean, the way that we're going, we're right in line with our budgeted numbers. If you remember back during the budget process, we had increased our revenue, budgeted revenue, to be a little bit more in line, be a little bit more aggressive, because we were coming out of a year that was somewhat suppressed activity, right? And so that we're not losing the opportunity as far as revenues and expenditures to be a little bit more in line. It's kind of tough when we have $3 million more in revenue than what we thought we were going to have.
I'm sorry, then what?
In revenue. So if you remember back at the first slide for fiscal year 21, we had $2.9 million more in revenue than we had budgeted for. That kind of, I wanted to tighten that number up a little bit. So we are pretty, compared to prior years, we're a little bit more aggressive in our revenue projections. So I think we're going to be more in line with that.
Yeah, and good response, David. And just want to let the council know too that David and I have talked a little bit more midterm to long term. We've been benefiting from really good construction activity. You did see the slide though. It's kind of looking like, it's up and down, up and down. Long term, as we build out as a community, the big commercial projects such as the hospital, we'll eventually maybe see Park Place build out, and then some of these other projects that we have in town, the Hotel Adero when that builds up, we get one-time construction sales tax on that. And right now, it's shared between the general operating revenue account and
capital
also the capital fund, correct? So we're trying to keep our eye on that because long-term, that's going to be problematic because as we're built out, we're not going to be getting that revenue. So we're going to be very careful that we're not budgeting and expending as much as we think we're getting into the future. We're going to start kind of leveling that off because it's not going to be sustainable. So I just want to let you know that.
Can I make one other comment? Yeah, just one other comment. We've gone through a very rough time with COVID and everything else and not knowing what was going to happen. I just want to compliment the staff for doing a stupendous job. I mean, we are really in good shape. And as recently as maybe 2 years ago, we were talking about, we could be deficit and didn't know what we were going to do about it. So done a terrific job. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and it's a tribute to the financial acumen of our finance director, David Pock, and then also our staff. I mean, we've been really able to kind of hold the line on expenditures. As you saw, we didn't spend everything that was budgeted last year, and so, anyways, no, it's a tribute to the staff, and I appreciate your compliment.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate all that information. If anybody has any other questions, you can always reach David or Grady.
Absolutely. And just to let you know, I will make one announcement that our kickoff meeting for the fiscal year 23 budget is tomorrow. Because,
Merry Christmas to you.
Who needs more than 24 hours to celebrate the audit, But yeah, so we're looking forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have our call to the public. Do we have any speaker cards?
We do. The first is Crystal Kavanaugh.
Good evening. It has been 2 weeks since I last questioned the continued mandating of masks in town-owned buildings in Fountain Hills. I have exchanged emails about this issue with the mayor, and while I was told this topic was to be revisited, no changes have been made and the mask mandate remains in effect here. Why is this? On what reliable science is this based that shows masks significantly protect from the micro and nanoparticles of COVID? Why are masks mandated in our government buildings here in Fountain Hills, but there is no such mandate in neighboring communities such as Scottsdale or Paradise Valley? We are not in any more danger than them to justify our mandate. The mayor appeared upset with me that I had referenced our mandate as virtue signaling, and she called it a phony label. But virtue signaling appears to be precisely what it is, an essentially useless action to support a cause in order to show how much more one cares about a specific group of people. I attended the art fair over the weekend, and it looked like it was a huge success in terms of weather, variety of vendors, and number of people browsing and purchasing. Most all were maskless. Even one of our councilmen sat maskless in his booth without fear as multiple people freely entered the tent. Throughout the avenue, people stood side by side. I understand it was mostly outdoors, but people were in close proximity and walked in and out of tented areas. Some people hugged each other or shook hands. People also entered other businesses and local restaurants. People were assessing their own risks and making their own decisions about whether to wear a mask or not. But here tonight, the attendees, the staff, and the council members are told we must wear masks. There are multiple signs telling us that we are required to do so, including the infamous A-frame sign. Not because we have all assessed our own risks and determined it to be in our best interest to do so, but because our mayor has decided that we must comply under the guise of a health and safety emergency. Many of us go about our entire day maskless in the community, but then we're told to put one on in this select situation to enter town buildings. Most of us quickly remove them as soon as we leave. I urge others in our community to express their concerns about this illogical perception of protection. I hope other members of this council will also let the mayor know that it's time to end this. I know this wasn't even voted on by the council, but if 2 members make a motion, are 4 council members able to reverse the decision? I'm here to directly request that the mayor stop imposing the mask mandate on Fountain Hills. Our town buildings are no less safe without masks, and they're no further protected with masks. People who are fearful and feel safer with a mask can continue to wear them, but stop forcing ineffective masking on others. The time has come to end this town government control and put the choice back on the individual people. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Do we have any other speaker cards?
Ted Price.
Hi, thank you very much, Chair, and we appreciate the opportunity to come before the council, Mayor, and make it very simple. And we have a problem, we have a concern, and this is about a cell tower that is within 20 feet of condos. We're up at La Vida and La Vida Buena, and there is a cell tower that has been there for quite a few years, and it is now a flagpole and so on. We understand that a new tower will be put up, but so far we have had no contact within the last 2 months concerning that cell tower. The city said that the people that own the cell tower have permission as of July to put up the new cell tower, and they're going to make it into a fake palm tree. But it's still within 20 feet of a residence. And so just quickly, I can show you what it looks like here, but what we are concerned about is the health implications. And I know you aren't all going to be able to see that, but that is what the cell tower looks like, and that's very, very close to a residence here. And the city codes talk about 200 feet from, the closest it should be is 200 feet from a condo or a residence. And obviously it's not, and but the rules and regs weren't enforced, and we were never notified that there was going to be a hearing or there was going to be an investigation. It was stated that the license, the permit had already been granted, and we were just wondering why. My final question is very simple. I can't imagine anybody, but I'll ask the question, would you like to live 20 feet from a cell tower? I wouldn't, and we appreciate your interest and your time, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Grady?
I believe staff may have been in touch with either Mr. Price or his neighbors, but I'd be happy to follow up with a meeting with Mr. Price. I believe this is a replacement for an existing cell tower, which was already previously permitted, but I will be happy to set up a meeting with him to discuss this more in detail.
Thank you. Any other cards?
Maureen Earp.
Thank you.
Hello, Council. I'm with Ted, and I live in La Vida Buena as well. And we knew nothing of this 3G tower going to a 5G tower. And those, to me, are totally different things. So I would also, Mr. Miller, like to be involved in a meeting with you because it really is within 20 feet of somebody's condo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will move on now to our consent agenda. Would someone like to make a motion, please?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So we're moving on to our regular agenda. We have a lot of business here. We're going to get a lot of accomplished, and we'll do our best for smooth sailing. Our first item is regarding the noise ordinance that we have discussed a couple times before. Grady?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. You recall at the previous council meeting on this topic, we had a really enlightening discussion and some input from the town prosecutor, particularly on the subject of white noise. So our development services director went back and sharpened his pencil a little bit, kind of took some of the feedback that we had and kind of brought back a new and improved ordinance that also has some additional criteria that I believe will show up in the presentation on the enforcement aspect of this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wesley, who will give you a staff report on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, Mayor, and Council. Good to be back before you again with another recurring topic here. So this time it's the noise ordinance. As you recall, we came before you first back in August with a proposed ordinance. Had some good discussion, feedback from the council. We took that and worked with the prosecutor and the town attorney and sheriff's office to respond to some of the questions and comments of the council. We were back before you, I believe about a month ago, where, as Mr. Miller said, the town prosecutor helped us understand the challenge of using a decibel approach to a noise ordinance. So we are back before you this evening with a revised ordinance that does now totally remove the decibel approach and rely on the unreasonable noise approach. Talk about that a little bit more in just a moment, but we'll step quickly through what's in the ordinance that's before you. Section A has been in the code, defines the purpose of the noise ordinance. We've refined that a little bit. This has been consistent in all the drafts that you've seen of this ordinance. Again, trying to balance the needs of both the residential areas and the commercial areas with what can work in either area. What might be disruptive or annoying in one area, a residential area might not be the same in a commercial area. Wanting to maintain, the commercial uses as well as the viability of our neighborhood. So again, trying to balance those is a purpose of this. Within the definitions section B of the code, we've removed all the definitions that had anything to do with a decibel and other related definitions that went with the provisions that were being removed. We did add the unruly gathering definition, and you'll see where that plays into the code a little bit later. Again, this has been in the code all along as we have talked about it as a benefit to the sheriff's office as they're out dealing with various situations. Sections C and D in the current code are the ones that deal with decibel levels. Those were removed. What was E has now become C. And this is the unreasonable noise section. So we've always had an unreasonable noise section in the code, where we had in the existing code, or do have in the existing code, both options. And so all we're doing now with this proposed revision is to remove the decibel approach that we understand really doesn't work for the reasons the prosecutor told us at the last meeting, and reinforcing or improving upon the unreasonable noise provision by clarifying a little bit more what that means, providing directly for the opportunity for the Maricopa County Sheriff's deputies to be that person who can determine a noise is unreasonable, take some of the pressure off a neighbor as they might have to work with a neighbor addressing these issues. And then per the discussion of the town council at the last meeting, have added in some factors that can be used. This is a list of 11 that we will go through. So these are in here, but they're not exclusive. The sheriff's deputy, if there are other factors they want to use, could pull other things in. But you can read through those and see the types of things they will be able to take into consideration. I'll highlight maybe a couple of them. The proximity to residential dwellings. So when you're in a neighborhood, a residential situation, and it's something close to them, you might consider it a little bit different if it's a greater separation. Or in number 6, the nature of the zoning of the area. So for example, in the town center area, where we have commercial zoning with residential uses in it, we'll likely look at that differently than we would a totally residential area. So we take into consideration, again, the town center area, it's a mixed use area. You can have activities, you can have events, those things are going to happen. Yes, the residential's here, but that would be looked at again a little bit differently than a totally residential neighborhood. Similarly, the density and habitation of the area, so a very low density area might be looked at a little differently than a high density intensity area when it occurs day and night, whether it's produced by commercial or non-commercial activities. So we'll be able to take all those types of things into consideration as deputy would review a specific situation. I think that will give them a lot of flexibility to address different situations and events that normally occur where noise might be associated versus things that might be unusual or inappropriate. So then we've added a provision to the code dealing with unruly gatherings. This helps the sheriff's office to deal with some of the large party situations that we've had some troubles with in the community. It gives them opportunity in terms of how they might address those, whether it's dispersal or issuing a citation. But again, gives them that ability. As we went through this last review with the prosecutor on the violation section, he recommended that we make all these violations Class 1 misdemeanors. Code as it's written today has it as civil penalties. And then we've also talked before, under item H, there's a list of exemptions to the ordinance. We're proposing to modify one of those that currently talks about lawn maintenance. We've had a little bit of challenge in applying that to the landscape maintenance that occurs on golf courses. So we've changed the wording to say landscape maintenance. And from the code that we put out initially, we realized we needed to make one more adjustment in what you have as the final code. So it's a little to more specifically allow for that landscape maintenance activity to happen on a golf course between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. So that we have some instances where they're starting a little bit earlier than that, 4 and 4:30, and that can be a disruption to the neighborhood. So that is the code as we have provided it to you. We do recommend approval. I'll see what questions you may have.
Thank you so much. John, any questions? Vice Mayor?
John, a couple of questions. What's the difference between natural and unnatural noise?
I think what whether the origin of the noise is natural or unnatural. So is somebody doing something to generate the noise would be unnatural versus things that just normally would occur with in a given situation or activity.
Okay, and with regard to landscape maintenance, I wasn't clear on what you were saying. The hours affect just golf courses?
It's landscape maintenance, so it could be personal activities too, but our challenge has been with golf courses where they often start pretty early in the morning, or some courses will start very early in the morning to do the upkeep on the greens to get them ready for the first round of golfers.
Seems to me that 5 a.m. in neighborhoods is awfully early. How did you come up with that?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, it was from discussions with the golf course managers and what times they typically start. Most of them want to start about an hour before the first tee time.
I'm sorry, can you differentiate between golf courses and neighborhoods? Can we legally do that?
My perspective is that if you wanted to differentiate for, certain uses, I suppose you could do that, or you could set it for certain times during different seasons, because I know that's a concern too, that we've discussed at least in part, that during the summer months, the golf courses like to get started a little bit earlier. So I believe those would be viable options. I don't know what John's opinion on that is.
Well, in golf courses, obviously it's wide open spaces, and they do have homes around the periphery. But you go into the neighborhoods, and you're on top of houses on top of houses, and 5 a.m. seems awfully early to me for lawnmowers and blowers and all that kind of thing.
So, Mayor, Vice Mayor, what you're maybe suggesting, is there a way that we can word this so on golf courses, landscape maintenance may occur at 5 a.m., otherwise they're not exempt anywhere else?
I don't know if the rest of the council agrees with me, but that's what I would propose that we look at.
Thank you, Mayor. Good discussion here. John, what is the operating hours for construction? Because I think that's a good kind of model. So we have, I believe, 2 different hours based on the season when they can do their startup times and end times. I'm sorry, I'm catching you off guard, but I think is it like 5:30 or something in the summer and 6:30 the rest of the year or something like that?
I can give you that answer in about.
Okay, thanks.
2 seconds, yes. It's in section 7.6 of the town code, but I don't have that exactly. But I believe the town manager is correct. I believe there are 2 different time periods based on the season, and it is earlier in the summer months than it is in the other time of the year.
5:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Monday through Friday from May 15th through September 15th. And then 6 a.m., prior to 6 a.m. and after 6:30 p.m. Monday through Friday for the rest of the year.
More time, I'm sorry, a little slower.
The limitations on construction activity shall apply to prior to 5:30 a.m. and after 6:30 p.m., Monday through Friday from May 15th through September 15th. And then for the rest of the year, it's prior to 6 a.m. and after 6:30 p.m., Monday through Friday.
To make it
Also-
consistent, we could make it 5:30, couldn't we, instead of 5?
Good?
I mean, that would be consistent with the construction.
But also, how come it's so late at night for landscape? 10 o'clock at night seems rather late for landscaping.
Mayor, council member, that was simply because that's what the numbers were in the previous ordinance, and we just copied them over. If the council would like to, as a general exemption on when the decibel limits would apply, and so I just copied that over.
The reality of it is
won't be
those,
that late.
those types of jobs that are involved in landscape maintenance are day jobs. And so they would be done by the end of the day. They would not be going in the evening unless there was something extraordinary going on. So there, I would recommend the council to consider mirroring something very similar on the noise ordinance to the construction hours, because I think it's a good seasonal times.
It's more consistent, too. And as far as enforcement for the town and everything, I think it would be a lot more consistent to mirror those hours. I don't understand. I mean, 10 o'clock seems excessive to me, but.
So,
And living on a golf course, I do know that they start at 4 and 4:30 in the morning in the summer regardless. So, but.
Mayor, if I may, from what I'm hearing from the council, and Aaron, tell me if you disagree, but it seems like we could maybe strike what's currently 2 on here and go down to item number 9, which is the one that relates to the construction hours, and simply amend that to say noise resulting from construction or golf course landscape maintenance per section 7.6.
That would be
address
a
what the
nice,
vice mayor was
clean way to
talking
do it.
also
I
about,
agree.
addressing golf courses versus other landscape maintenance.
Does it have to say golf course? I mean,
Yeah, if that's picking up from what the vice mayor said. That's up to the
Yeah.
council if you want to limit it to that or be any landscape maintenance.
Well, what if we just said have it align with the construction everywhere?
Yeah, that's fine.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry, Mike.
Aaron, did you say Monday through Friday on the construction?
There are also exceptions for, and it says prior to 7 a.m. and after 5 p.m. on Saturdays throughout the year. There's a prohibition at all times on Sundays and legal holidays. So, I should have read
Well,
3 and 4.
Just seems like construction is like 7 days a week, so I'm surprised they did that back in the day, but.
So we probably can't do that exactly.
But I think you can pull out the hours and just
Okay.
craft it that way. And Councilmember Charno, you're right. It does seem like they do construction on Sundays, but I will tell you that there are some certain activities that they'll get exemptions from. Right now in the code, it basically says that things that are perishable, such as concrete, a lot of times if there's a reason why they can't do it the other days of the week, they'll appeal to the town, and the town engineer will go ahead and grant that on a limited basis. It's not everybody, it's just, maybe it might be the number of yards that they have to do, and they have to do it so that it doesn't dry before it has a chance to set. But you're right.
They'll allow even earlier hours during certain times of the year if they got big pours and have to do it before it gets too hot. Right.
Right, so I would just say in your motion, or if you want to have that be amended, definitely just go with the specific hours as referenced in the code, and just go with those, pull those out separately.
Okay, not the days. We had the 11 factors.
Yes.
Would a factor be who, oh, I don't know how to say this, the historical presence or who was there first kind of a thing? It's kind of the old, you move next to an airport and then you don't like the airport noise. So it seemed like it would go along with those 11. Would there be such thing as this whatever was there before the residential came in, any kind of it's not really an exemption, it's with that other factor.
yes.
Is
Mayor,
there
I-
anything like that that you've seen anywhere?
Well, so, Mayor, I think item 3 on the list, where the nature is of the noise is usual or unusual. So if it's usual in that area because the use has been there, then I think that'd be part of what the officer would take into consideration versus something that all of a sudden just started happening.
Okay, so like if it's some kind of a store that's been there all the while that had people coming and going, and then people move close and they get upset about it, but it was there, so it's kind of
Correct.
the same thing. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
that's why I would be it.
All right. Yes, Jerry.
John, who determines whether a gathering is unruly?
That would be the sheriff's deputy. At the time, the captain may be able to address that better than I could, of how they would actually apply that in a given situation. But-
Well, and I wonder too, getting back to the factors, there's been some concern raised about noise at, hotels and resorts and restaurants and such, outdoor patios. I mean, does number 6 kind of cover that as well in terms of the nature and zoning of the area, within which the noise emanates?
Yes, Mayor, council member, yes, I believe that does take that into consideration, along with number 7. But I think those factors pulled together does allow the officer to make that distinction. Am I here on the avenue, or am I up on, wherever, quiet residential street? What is the nature of the zoning? What types of uses are intended or planned for that area? What's usual, unusual within those areas? So your typical noise coming from a restaurant or a resort or whatever, that's fine. If for whatever reason, they get a really loud, band playing one night that's not usual, not typical, and really is causing a disturbance, that's, could be out of the ordinary, and the factors could be used that way. But I think typically it would say, yeah, we expect those types of events and activities to happen, so some level of noise is expected in those areas.
Yeah, I think there was just concerns about how this could kind of be used against establishments that have already been doing this kind of stuff for years and years, so just wanted to bring that up.
Mayor, Councilmember, that goes a little bit back to that purpose statement at the beginning. It is an effort to try to balance both sides and look at the specific situation.
And, I was going to say that very similar language is already there.
Correct.
As it is right now. And I don't know about you all, but I haven't had complaints of that nature at all, really, whether it's down here or, anywhere. It's mostly these other things that have started to come up. I just want to mention, because somebody sent me an email suggesting that there are leaf blowers that make a significant reduction in noise. So I don't know, I know that we ourselves, we can pick and choose what we want to use once in a while, but I just wanted to put it out there that he suggested that those are in existence. So if we ever wanted to suggest something like that, or let somebody know that that there are options for that. So, any other questions or comments? Yeah. Can I go to cards now? Speaker cards, please.
First one is Madeline Bauer.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. My name is Madeline Bauer, and I'm an attorney at Rose Law Group, 7144 East Stetson Drive, and I'm here on behalf of our client, Adero Resort. I would like to start off by thanking you all and thanking the town for its efforts in adjusting the noise ordinance. I know it's been a lot, so thank you for doing that. Generally, the proposed ordinance is great, as it includes not only objective standards for determining what is reasonable, but also a list of exemptions. However, one of the main concerns moving forward with the text amendment is that the consequences the subjective standard will have on local businesses operating according to approved uses. After reviewing the text amendment, our interpretation of the ordinance is that it does not impact Adero's pre-existing approved uses under our current zoning. Adero, as you know, is an existing resort that has always held weddings and other events like resorts usually do, with regular historic commercial use under zoning allowing such use and in a higher density area. Our preference is that we make this abundantly clear as to the intent of this council and just simply modify the amendment today to include very clear words, quote, noises resulting from activities of a business consistent with uses allowed by its approved zoning designation, end quote, as an exemption. Our fear, and of course as an attorney I'm paid to worry about this, is that let's say in 10 years down the line, people retire and that someone would have trouble understanding the intent, and we might be back here arguing over the same things again that we could just easily cure now, just by adding these few words. Our overall goal here is to ensure that local businesses like Adero can continue to support the success and economy of Fountain Hills by continuing to operate according to their approved uses without issue. Thank you very much for your time, and if for some reason you don't feel comfortable with adding these few words as an exemption, then we would add a minimum request that you just confirm on the record that the intent is to allow Adero to continue operating under their approved zoning designation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Question for council. Can you respond to those requests?
Sure. You're asking me, could I respond to some of the things that the representative from Adero just said? Thank you, Mayor and Council. Sure. I think I understand the nature of the requests. I don't imagine that it would be the purpose of any amendment to preclude a business from continue to operate a business or to continue to operate within the zoning district in which they're already permitted to operate. Indeed, I would say that that's the purpose of that exemption, or not exemption, that factor number 6, right, which talks about what's the nature of the surrounding zoning and the surrounding zoning districts. My view on this is that it's certainly up to the council whether they wanted to make a specific exemption or not. It's a policy matter. If they want to make it clearer, that's fine. My position is we would want an ordinance that would necessarily give flexibility in the event that there is a concern. We would want to be able to address that and not sort of put deputies or put anyone in a position where we feel like we're hamstrung by an inability because of an exemption that we created. So that's my view of it. It's ultimately the council's purview of whether to adopt such an exemption or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, but if we provide, in all due respect, if we provide an exception for one, I mean, there's other hotels and stuff like that in town, so would that exception apply just to them?
No, and I don't imagine that's what council's requesting on behalf of Adero, that it would just apply to Adero. I think that the language that you read would seemingly apply more broadly.
Yes, would you like me to read it again?
That would actually be helpful, I think.
Okay, great. So it is noises resulting from activities of a business consistent with uses allowed by its approved zoning designation.
Again, I don't know that what you said earlier about intention, I think is in the factors that are listed there rather than having to do an extra exemption. And just in my opinion, I think it's covered. And from the tone of the conversation here, I think that, and when I had mentioned earlier about like historical existence, you exist there. So I think that you're in good shape with this as is. I don't think we need to add that language, but obviously it's up to everybody. Thank you.
Can I make a comment or?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so if the exemption's not wanted, is there just any way to confirm for the record that, that the normal course of business and the approved zoning that we already have should be considered reasonable as long as it's consistent with their approved zoning and uses as it has been so far?
I think so. If I can see maybe you can help me. One of the factors I think covers that, but I lost it here.
Mayor, I would agree with that. Again, I don't think the intention is to preclude as I stated before, to preclude anyone from continuing in the operation of normal course of business. I wouldn't want that. I don't think anyone on the council would want that, frankly. And that's where this reasonableness idea comes in. At the same time, if it does end up that, whether it's at a resort or anywhere, frankly, within town at any commercial business, don't necessarily want to put anything that would make it such that we can't take an enforcement action if the need arises, because the nature of the use or the noise that is consistent with or is inconsistent with what's been done in the past. It just expands and becomes more and more. So I'm comfortable enough saying that the ordinance isn't substantively changing in terms of the reasonable, unreasonable noise from what it's been for years. And so I'm comfortable taking that position. Yeah.
We're talking, though, about existing facilities and so on. What about those that are built in the future? Same thing?
Well, sorry, can you repeat, Vice Mayor, could you repeat what you said? I'm sorry.
Well, we're talking about Ardero here, but let's take the name out of it and say that somebody comes along and builds something like an Ardero. Would the ordinance, as we have it in front of us, apply the same to a new one as an old one?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, yes. This noise ordinance applies, no one's grandfathered in under any ordinance. There's not one version of an ordinance that applies to existing businesses or resorts or uses as opposed to new ones. The noise ordinance is the noise ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'm confused. What is council worried about? Why are you, I mean, is Ardero going to have a ZZ Top concert? No. Just what exactly are you concerned about? Because I'm confused.
So, they've been throwing events for years, including weddings, and there's never really been an issue with it. But with this ordinance having nothing specifically that's abundantly clear that says, noise resulting from businesses that are consistent with their approved zoning designations, as a lawyer, just like not having that clear language in there, it's like, oh, there should be something that maybe 10 years down the line, someone will come back, will be like, no, well, this doesn't seem reasonable anymore, or something like that, when we've been, operating as a resort with weddings and events for years now. And so we just want to clarify, even if an exemption isn't added, that, Ardero has been operating as a resort for years. This is a usual noise that has been heard, and as long as it stays consistent with our approved zoning moving forward, there shouldn't be an issue.
So, Counselor, how many times has MCSO been dispatched to Ardero Canyon on noise complaints?
I cannot confirm that.
I'm going to guess 0.
Yeah.
Just a guess.
There's been no issues that I have seen.
So, I mean, I'm all for you getting your hourly rate and getting, hats off to you, but I just think it's a moot point. I mean, we don't go out there. MCSO doesn't go out there.
Exactly.
You just said they're not going to have a ZZ Top concert. Weddings, bar mitzvahs, quinceañeras, we're all good.
Yes. We just want to confirm that the intent was okay.
You just want us to say Ardero Canyon is exempt from the noise ordinance.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Honestly, I realize what you said had more words in it, but it's the same exact thing as number 6 to me. So I feel like we got to go with our town attorney here. I mean, I'm just learning the difference between reasonable and unreasonable, so I definitely can't hear any difference between what she said and our number 6. So I kind of feel like it goes with where we want it to go.
Yeah, and Mayor and Council, I appreciate that. I also appreciate Council from Rose for being here tonight. I appreciate her expressing her client's concerns and advocating for her client's position, because that's what they teach us to do. I certainly appreciate that. That being said, to the extent it's necessary to make clear that this is in no way intended to interfere with someone's existing uses, I don't have a problem saying that. It doesn't mean that the noise ordinance will not apply.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that it couldn't apply if there's an unreasonable use, but I think that we're actually kind of all on the same page. Okay.
That's what I'm here to confirm.
Thank you.
Confirm.
I think we have other speaker cards too. Do you have any other questions?
Nope, I think that just figured it out. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
There's no more speaker cards. I do have 3 written comments. You want me to go ahead and
Yes,
read those?
please.
Okay, the first one is from Jim Ruff. He says, I strongly support the changes proposed by staff to Section 1117 noise of the town ordinance. I strongly support eliminating the decibel levels in the noise ordinance for the reasons identified by staff, the MCSO, and the town prosecutor. However, the definition for unruly gathering needs amending. An unruly gathering or noise condition could be caused by any number of people, even a few people. I suggest the definitions should say, unruly gathering means any loud noise on any private, residential, or commercial property. I support all the remaining changes to the noise ordinance. Please approve it as recommended by staff. Next one is from James Henke. He writes, I support the changes proposed by staff to section 1117 noise of the town ordinance. I support eliminating the decibel levels in the noise ordinance identified by staff, the town prosecutor, and MCSO. Please review the definition of unruly gathering so it supports the ordinance. I support all additional changes to the ordinance. And the last one was from Vanessa Davison, who says that they support the noise ordinance with removing the decibel level and allowing consideration for nuisance issues.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, if someone would like to make a motion on page 292?
I'll make a motion.
Yes?
I move approval of ordinance 21-11 with the following change, that on H2, the maintenance hours be changed to be the same as we now have for construction.
Is that good? Second, anyone? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, John, so much, and Grady and everyone, Aaron. Thanks for coming. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to go to 8G, which is the approval of fee waiver policy relating to youth fields, courts, and sports leagues. Grady?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. So this is the, I would say, part two to the previous discussions that we had on fee waivers. I believe based on the previous discussion we've had with the council related to youth field, courts, and sports leagues, that we were able to obtain some consensus. So Rachel Goodwin, the Community Services Director, is going to give you a staff report with the staff recommendations on this, which I believe is consistent with the direction we received from the council the last time we had this discussion. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Goodwin.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We are here to, just as our town manager mentioned, to resume the discussion regarding fee waivers. This portion is specific to our youth fields, courts, and sports leagues. We have a lot of demand. It's a growing demand in our community, which is great, and we love the use. But we want to have a kind of a fair and consistent way to allocate our fields and determine when and how fees may be waived. So essentially, the inclusions, just as I said, it's a uniform set of guidelines that we'll be that we are recommending. It provides an equitable means for organizers to apply for the fee reductions, as well as develop partnership with the town. It establishes guidelines, criteria, and process for those applications. It does outline that no more than 50% of the fees are eligible for being waived. And then we did put in there the language about an exceptional circumstances. Should they arise, the policy does allow for a user agreement to be considered if it's mutually beneficial for the town and the organization. I'm going to ask you to put an asterisk on this because we are going to come back to this specific bullet at the end of this. As a whole, the policy outlines that organizations have other responsibilities. So even when if they do receive a fee waiver, they are still responsible for a number of things. Specifically, what insurance as required. Any group that we partner with does have to have that. Failure to abide by the guidelines can result in a loss of fee reductions for up to 1 year. It is subject to availability for the facilities. So again, if we have competing interests, if we have repairs, we have damage, heaven forbid we have any flooding or anything of that nature. Hopefully we never do. It does obviously come down to availability. It doesn't have preference over town programs, so if we have something already scheduled going on, maybe let's call it an Easter egg hunt, that would take priority first. And then applicants would still have to abide by any other rules, regulations, laws, ordinances, things like that. So it doesn't exempt them from that. What this policy does is introduces the concept of the Fountain Hills Youth Sports Alliance. It's eligible, any Fountain Hills-based youth sport program is eligible for this alliance. And what it does is it brings all the players to the table so that we can work as a group collectively to allocate space, whether it's field space, court space, rentals, whatever that might be, so that we can work, again, collectively. So if we have multiple uses going on at the same time, we can work to see, okay, how can that work? How can we collaborate together and make sure that we are optimizing and serving all of our community needs? So with that in mind, that's the basis of the policy. We did outline, and the big takeaway here is that it does offer a 50% reduction, and that's the up to amount that we would potentially waive for a youth fee. That being said, I know a number of council in the past have brought up concerns specifically about our Little League and our soccer programs, because those are their two biggest users. So with that in mind, I wanted to go back to that asterisk that we said about user agreements. Right now, Little League averages about $41,000 in costs annually. That's more than, even at a 50% reduction, that's probably more than that organization can manage financially. Soccer, while it's lower than that, it's about $16,000. Again, they do not have the financial means to pay even at a 50% rate. So these two would be recommended to use the user agreement concept. In that agreement, we would go beyond just fees, but address storage, snack stand usage, the availability or scheduling, and then of course, community service efforts in lieu of, so that it's clearly outlined what those agreements would be with each of these groups. That being said, that is the concept behind the policy.
I think Rachel did a really good job of summarizing some of the previous discussions with some additional details the council hadn't heard before. The one thing I just want to really point out about the user agreements is that we would try to get from the different user organization some in-kind services. I know Rachel touched upon that, but it might be things like field prep and maybe work weekends. So we put a dollar value on that in exchange for what the value of the fee waivers would be. So we're trying to have, a quid pro quo, so there's some value, so they're just not getting something totally for free or a total fee waiver. So that's what we're attempting to accomplish with these user agreements.
Correct. That being said, you have a draft of the policy, so I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, it's no secret that these fees and everything has been brought up by me on numerous occasions. I believe that no matter what you play, you should have skin in the game, and there should be a fee. Not outrageous, but a fee. I think what bothers me is the fact that we turn these lights on, these people make arrangements to use the field, and then they don't show up. And there's no consequences for not showing up. And I think that sets a poor example. When you leave the lights on for people that don't show up, it just gives them reason to just do it over and over again. So personally, what I would like to see is some type of policy that we can put into effect, or when we enter into these agreements with both of these agencies or leagues, that it's specifically said that if you make an appointment for us to turn the lights on and for you to use the field and you don't show up, there has to be some consequence. It would take very to little no effort to call ahead and say, hey, we scheduled this, but we're not going to be able to make it. And so then we can turn the lights off. $12,000 is a lot of money for lights. So I'm not against Little League. I played Little League from T-ball all the way to high school. So my parents paid dearly. So I'm not expecting residents or parents to dig deep into their pockets, but there has to be some type of pay. And I also want to caution that when we start entering into these agreements, where does it stop? How many agreements are we going to enter into? You know, it's 2 now, then somebody's going to call the mayor or somebody's going to call the town manager and say, we want an agreement, we want this, we want that. There has to be a limit to what we do, and I think we need to set the tone for the residents to say that if you're using the facilities, you have to have skin in the game.
So on these agreements, I mean, are we contemplating zero cost for these groups in exchange for in-kind work, or would it be 25%, or we don't know until we sit down with them, or?
Well, and to kind of double back on what Councilmember Spellich just mentioned, you know, building in consequences for no-shows, I think is certainly something that can be done in the agreement. If there is, you know, support from the council level to add, I'll say a nominal fee, whether it's, I don't know, $5 you know, a player, so to speak, or something, again, nominal, to have either some sort of financial contribution to offset something. We can certainly work that in there if there's a number that's comfortable and agreeable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that number is. I mean, I guess that's up to staff when you sit down and do these agreements. I mean, I'm not opposed at all either to what Councilman Spellich is saying, if there's some way we can itemize that in terms of, you know, scheduling and not showing up. I'm not opposed to that at all. You know, I talked to Rachel earlier today about the priority issue, and I don't know if you were going to cover that in a future slide, or?
I can certainly do that. In the draft policy that you have in front of you, we did outline the priority scheduling, so that when it comes down to it, if there are multiple asks for a resource or a field or a court, we do have some sort of scheduling priority, which first priority would be town programs and or maintenance and repairs that are going on. The second priority is outlined as organizations with contractual agreements with the town, including IGAs, contractual rentals, things like that. What Councilmember Charno was concerned with is that priority number 3 indicates that members of the Sports Alliance would be the third in line, so to speak, the over a paying rental. So conceptually, rentals are made usually a year in advance. So if a rental comes and says, I want to hold a program March 10th through 12th, and we agree to that date for them, and they have a contract with the town, an outside group, whether they are an alliance, part of the alliance or not, can't bump them from that contractual date. That being said, the alliance would have, I'll call it first dibs for anything, and then anything remaining we contract out. We can't come back and then remove that person, so to speak. So a contract is binding. That being said, a user agreement is arguably also a contract, so we can make sure that that's outlined in there, or more clearly stated in there, so that everyone understands that there is that priority, that our users, our local users, do have first dibs.
That's all well and good, but what I think has to happen is that they have to give you, you have to set a timeline for them to book these fields. I mean, for those of us who are married, we booked a wedding. We book a wedding a year in advance. Somebody doesn't bump you from that weekend.
Correct.
It's your wedding. So I think that we should be very judicious, and like, you should come up with, from January 1st to January 30th or whatever, you tell us what you want, then you get first dibs. And then when you start booking later on, those people had the opportunity, you snooze, you lose. So that's what I think. I don't know if Councilman Charno was in agreement with that, but I just think that they should give you plenty of notice, and whatever they book, And if later on it doesn't turn out, I'm sorry. The town should be run as a business, and we're not in the business of losing money. We wouldn't do it if we owned a business. We wouldn't do it. I mean, I just don't think that, I don't know if that's his intention or not, but I just believe that you, as the director and the town manager, should sit down and say, all these people that are associated with this league have the ability to contact you, and you give them a date. And if it's past that date, oh well, so sad.
Well, I think it's understood in my discussion with Rachel earlier is like Little League has a generic season more or less starting in late January and going into May, and the soccer club has, a fall season or what have you. So I think those kind of fall in place, and then from there, the contracts and the tournaments and the paying customers have other times during the year that they want to be out there. So there's not a lot of conflicts necessarily. I think we're doing a good job of accommodating some of the outside groups and getting money from them. But on the other hand, I mean, there's just about every Parks and Rec department in this country, and swimming pools and what have you, and gyms, you're not making money on those programs and activities. You're subsidizing them, and that's kind of what we do here as well. So there's really nothing unusual about that, and we're not, this isn't a business per se, at least when it comes in that area.
It is a tricky balance between making sure that we're accommodating all of our, residents' uses and our locals versus having a revenue component so that we can maintain the fields and make sure that we are, contributing back to the use of our parks and things like that. So it is a balance. I certainly understand that.
I feel like there's financial gain, a group of sports ball people for financial gain. Then there's the ones that we subsidize, the Little League and the youth soccer kind of people. Yes, this is a business and it should be treated as a business, and I wholeheartedly support that. But you also have to look at it as we want the younger generations to move into town with their kids, and where are we drawing the line at subsidy? And I think it's important conversation. So I support the subsidy for the local Little League-y things, sports ball people.
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously we're walking a line, we have parks that obviously don't ever make any money, but they're there for people's public use, so we're trying to balance that. Do we have a limit of how far in advance people can make reservations for anything?
That's a great question. So when it comes to, so we know we have identified seasons, just as Councilman Charno mentioned, Little League season is spring, if you will. Football season and soccer seasons are usually in the fall. Basketball is generally in the winter. Tennis might be the one variable that kind of is played spring and fall. That being said, when we know there's a local league or club, we will reach out to them. We'll take reservations 6 months in advance if possible. Generally, they aren't able to provide it that far in advance, but we do ask for a schedule, and that is where we have some difficulty sometimes is setting up a schedule that says, the Rangers practice on Monday and the Brewers practice on Tuesday and the Dodgers practice on Wednesday. They don't usually have that level of organization, so we hold a number of nights in anticipation of that. And then they're able to say, oh, we don't need Wednesday nights anymore, and then we can release that back out to make that available to other users. Now, that being said, when we have large tournaments, we'll use the wedding analogy. When there's a large tournament that says, hey, we're bringing folks in from California and we're bringing players in from Colorado, we want to hold a tournament during your spring break week in Arizona, because who doesn't want to be here in March? We do work with them in advance, but we do communicate with our local leagues that says, hey, we're looking to host this group, this tournament. It would, require usage of fields, we would work with them to either reallocate fields another day or another time, or potentially a different field. And they've been very generous and worked with us on that. So we haven't had those conflicts, but we do take reservations. The large tournaments, they have to book over up to a year in advance so that we can plan for it and make sure that we have the accommodations available.
What's the remedy? So if you're going to waive fees for a league and they agree to help with field prep or field maintenance, and they don't fulfill that end of the bargain, what's the remedy in that case?
That's a great question. I hope we don't have to cross that bridge, but if we did, I would probably ask them to come back in and review the agreement, because the agreement would be annual, so I do think that there is a natural review process already built into that, so that we can come back and say, hey, this wasn't fulfilled, so we either need to renegotiate, or if it's certainly egregious or it's an ongoing or there's other problems, we would probably need to reevaluate whether the fee waiver was something or the user agreement was the appropriate tool.
Can't you include something like that in the agreement already?
We do, and you might have noticed there was some language in there that says if they, per the policy, that, where does it say? A failure to abide by the guidelines and requirements set forth in the policy and or the user agreement, I'll use kind of interchangeably there, would be ineligible to receive future fee reductions for a period of at least 1 year. So if it was something egregious and something that was done, we could certainly, turn to that piece of it.
Okay, but why would it be for future years, and why not erase their current fee reduction for violating the terms of the contract? Because what if they don't come back next year?
True.
Then there's really no recourse.
Absolutely, we could certainly do that. We could certainly make it a tougher language, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do we have any speaker cards on this? Not on this item, okay. So what do we need? We're kind of throwing some stuff around. We have a suggested motion, but does somebody want to make amendments to it? Does David want to add anything about cancellation fee? Do you want to add anything about, Peggy, I'm sorry, language for this year, that immediately, canceled immediately upon violation or something like that?
Is that what you want, or do you want staff to have the discretion to do it? I mean, there should be some verbiage in there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you if you were. I think there should, I don't know if we should make the verbiage because we're not in Parks and Recreation. I mean, there should be some type of verbiage included in all these agreements that if they're turning on the lights, they're striping the field and they're doing what they're supposed to do and they don't show up, there should be some kind of punitive, there should be something in it. But I mean, I don't know if you want me to make something up, I will, but.
I think we're in really good hands. So what's important is the council members are the policymakers here, so they're basically telling us what they want to see, and we're going to do our best to make sure that these agreements have the spirit and intent of what you're trying to accomplish here. We work very closely with our attorney on drafting these. Just as an example, when we went through and we did the small business assistance grants, council authorized it. We came up with what we called a community contract. It was iron tight. It said how the money could be used, and it really gives us a lot of strong language in there to protect the town's interests. So I think we'll be okay on this.
Okay, so just make sure that everybody's on the same page here. Okay, so someone, you want to make a motion? 412.
Move to approve the youth field, court, and sports league fee waiver policy subject to Peggy McMahon's suggestions and David Spellich's suggestions.
I bet. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Absolutely, thank you.
I think you're up next, Stu.
I am.
So this is, I'll just leave this off a little bit. This is the one that's a little bit stickier, and we saved the best for the last. Rachel's going to go ahead and talk about this, but this is the one that we've had probably the greatest challenge and difficulty in trying to come up with something that, satisfies both the users and some of the policy direction we've been trying to get from the council, and we've been actually struggling with trying to come up with something that addresses this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Goodwin, who will report to you on this.
Thank you. Just as Grady mentioned, this one has been the most difficult piece of this policy to tackle. If you note, it's been a year since this originally came to light and when the first ask was made. So it has been a really tough road. This particular policy discussion, and that's what this one is tonight, it is discussion. There isn't a proposed one on the table yet. This is the part that we have gone round and round as staff. We have looked at this from multiple perspectives, from multiple aspects, and have come full circle on how to sort of tackle this discussion. So what I want to put out before we get going here is that we are looking for uniform guidelines and process. Much like what we just talked about in terms of the youth sports and fields, a policy is meant to be guiding, and it's meant to be something that we can apply across the board as staff. So at the same time, we are looking to balance the needs for both cost recovery while offering affordable community space for our programs and our performances and our gatherings. So it is not, we have not brought this to you lightly. And I know that I've had a number of discussions in the last 2 days with folks that are very concerned about the impacts of this, want to understand it, have been very gracious about asking lots of questions so that they feel informed about where this could go. That being said, we are asking for your feedback tonight so that we can find some consensus to round out this last piece of the policy. With that, the community center. The community center is, I often call it all things to all people. It is everything. It is a performance venue. It is a gathering space. It is a coffee chat time. It is a poker casino. It is everything. There's lots of poker that goes on there. There's bingo, there's all kinds of stuff. So it is a lot of things to a lot of people. The heart of this recommendation is that as we move forward with the fee waivers, Fountain Hills-based nonprofit groups would be recommended for a 50% fee reduction from the established nonprofit rates. So we have a fee schedule. It would be half of that. And I do have a slide that will kind of show that in a second. That kind of strikes to the heart of the recommendation at this point. So it would be the reduced nonprofit rates and then reduced by half for any nonprofit that's based here in Fountain Hills.
Is that automatic, or do they have to apply for the reduction?
At this point, I would probably say automatic. If you call, you say, hey, I'm the XYZ nonprofit and I'm here in Fountain Hills, they would need to provide some information to us. They would need to provide a copy of their 501c3 status so that we do know that it's a legitimate situation. Right. And they would need to abide by the criteria that's recommended.
Okay, so is it just for Fountain Hills-based nonprofits, or does it apply to out-of-town nonprofits?
It would, in this recommendation, it would be Fountain Hills only. Okay. So we do have a nonprofit rate. So if a out-of-town nonprofit, let's say, I don't know, St. Mary's Food Bank wanted to hold a retreat here, they would still qualify for the nonprofit rate, just not the further reductions, if that makes sense.
Mayor? Sorry.
So out-of-town nonprofit organizations can come in and have a reduced rate. It's not equivalent to 50%.
Correct.
It's just the normal reduced rate, and they're not entitled to a 50% reduction.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, it's my understanding that there are nonprofits that are not 501c3s, and that being a 501c3 requires a lot of paperwork and so on. So my question is this: would it be possible to put together a legal agreement with a nonprofit that's not a 501c3 and requires them to produce expenditures, sales and so on, whatever it is, on an annual basis? That way we keep track of it all, but they don't have to go through the arduous process of becoming a 501c3.
I have a suggestion on this. We know what groups these are, and you're absolutely right. There's a number of them that are not the charitable 501c3. There's tax-wise. There are a number that are fraternal organizations like the veterans organizations. There's also the Kiwanis and Rotary and those types of organizations, and they're not necessarily, they may have foundations, but they may not be a 501c3. So I think the best way to do it is we would describe them as the types of organizations and call them out by name. And if there's somebody that comes in that doesn't fit that, then we would have that under review and evaluation. But I wouldn't get it to be so technical, because we just looked as part of one of the other agenda items tonight. We're going to talk about the nonprofit grant program that we're going to be launching. And I forget how many, there were like 21 different, 501c organizations. And some look like for-profit, some do not. But the point is, I think what I'd rather do is, you raise a really good point. I think we just strike the whole thing about 501c3, and we would just talk about nonprofit organizations as determined by, the town. Because we have a number of these organizations, like I said, that fit under different definitions.
Right, it's the determined by the town part that I think we have to look at, because,
Right.
You got an organization that says they're nonprofit, and they're out there selling stuff all over the place and making a profit. How do you deal with that?
Right. We'll have all the definitions that you see that the IRS uses, but we won't use the designation of the C category.
Thanks for that clarity. I think that's a very smart change.
Excuse me, so then it wouldn't be proof of a 501c3, it would be activities or acting as if they were granted 501c3 status by the IRS.
We'll come up with something that basically would say demonstration of a nonprofit status.
Okay.
I think that sounds good. Because we don't want to exclude our other groups. We know, like you said, our veteran groups and things like that, we have a number of those. We don't want to exclude that, but we do want to have some type of legitimacy behind the fee waivers and who's eligible. So trying to find that right verbiage, things like that. We would want the entirety. And I know you've heard me talk about how, it just sort of is a scope creep, hey, our luncheon starts at 11, well, that means our caterers need to come in at 10, well, that means I've got to get something out of the way. So we want to make sure that we're encompassing the entire process. Weekend reservations would require a minimum with 2 ballrooms and 4 hours of time. And then the reservations would be available to be made up to 6 months in advance and also are subject to availability. And then we would change, again, that last bullet regarding the 501c3 to just being, the confirmation of nonprofit status.
Mayor, a couple of questions on things you just mentioned. I'm looking at a bullet that says, weekend reservations, no, I'm sorry, not that one. Classroom space will be reservable after 2 p.m. on weekdays and must adhere, et cetera. But then I'm seeing reservations can be made up to 6 months in advance. Are those inconsistent?
The concept being, if you needed to reserve a room and you were eligible for this and you said, I need it on Wednesday at 9 a.m., I don't have rooms available on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. I have rooms available from 2 p.m. or later. We have a lot of demand in our daytime, our morning hours for our existing senior programs and support groups. I don't have a lot of availability for classroom spaces on weekday mornings. So we're asking our groups that receive these reduced rentals to use 2 o'clock or later times for their reservations.
Yeah, but you're saying classrooms. Does that include bingo?
Bingo's in a ballroom.
As an example.
Exactly. No, it would, if, I'm trying to think of a good example group. Let's say the community garden wanted to hold their board meeting. They would need to hold it at 2 o'clock or later in one of our classrooms. Now, they could say, I want to hold it in March, and 6 months from now on, Tuesday at the 3rd at 5 p.m. Great, no problem. It's within 6 months, and it's after 2 o'clock on that
But that's tying
day.
it down for 6 months.
What's that?
But that is tying it down for 6 months.
Correct.
What if somebody comes along 2 weeks in advance and wants the same time, same space, whatever?
So once it's on our schedule, I don't mind holding it. The issue that we tend to run into is that our groups like to make a whole year reservation. So when they reserve, let's say on September 1st, they give me a whole year, and in May, I have a wedding that would like to come in, and that's the only thing I have on my schedule is a 1-hour meeting that has been reserved, a year in advance. Generally speaking, if we can keep them into 6-month blocks, it allows a little more flexibility to bring in some larger groups and some other reservations.
Okay, the other issue I have is why 2 ballrooms?
Our weekend times are in peak demand, and it's in order to sort of justify the usage of the space and the staff time and the setup and tear down. We're trying to encourage larger groups on weekends.
But aren't there groups that aren't large, that don't need all that space, who could do just as well in one ballroom, and another group could do just as well in the other ballroom?
If I had shared demand, if I had 2 groups that both want it, that would be fine. But generally speaking, I get one group on one Saturday morning that wants to meet for 20 people for an hour. And that makes it difficult to open the whole facility, bring in staff, set up, tear down for 1 hour for 20 people on a Saturday. Ideally, we would say, hey, can you hold that meeting on a weekday afternoon or a weekday evening where we're better able to accommodate you? And then that leaves the ballroom available for hopefully a larger group or a private rental or something of that nature.
Last question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever have instances where the ballrooms, plural, are not used on a weekend?
We do.
And so if somebody came along in that case and said, I only want one ballroom, you're saying you can't do it, you got to have both ballrooms?
If we didn't have anything else booked in that ballroom, and that happens to me mostly in the summertime, not so much this time of year. This time of year, it's, but on a July weekend, that certainly happens. And again, we come back to the economy of scale of being able to say, okay, then I'm going to bring in a staff person for 2 hours to open up the facility. We would probably encourage them to choose a different weekend or a different day and time when we have staffing set up already.
These things are easy.
Super.
Well, again, you're talking about, they're asking for 50% off. So that's why these are their contingencies, or this is what they have to do to get the 50% off. If they want to pay the full price, they can have one, or they can come at 9 a.m. or that kind of thing. So this is part of what the agreement is, so you get the 50% off.
I was just going to say, that's exactly what I was going to say, Mayor. What I really like about the proposal is that this is a demand management technique. You see this like sometimes with parking or other types of rental types of situations, or you go bowling or something. The off-peak is where you pay the lower rate, and then the peak, where it's in higher demand, you pay the higher price. So I think this is a very good tool that we're trying to use so that we can get maybe more of the revenue generating types of activities in these facilities.
So,
Thank you. Rachel, can you assure the vice mayor that his bingo won't be affected? Because it seems like that's his bone of contention. Anyways.
I'm not that old.
So so residents know what we're talking about. What would be 50%? Is that in another slide?
it is. You're leading right into the next slide. I appreciate that. In anticipation of what you were going to ask, we did have this put together so that you can see the current rates for nonprofits, weekdays versus weekends, and that was what Grady just mentioned, kind of that peak versus non-peak. It shows that these, so I do want to caveat, Councilmember McMahon mentioned that we do have these nonprofit rates that are posted. We also have commercial rates that are higher still. So if you are not a nonprofit and you are a for-profit commercial group, that is another layer of fees that are higher than what you're seeing here. So in the left column, you see the current rates, Monday through Thursday, and then the proposed rates for the Fountain Hills nonprofits on the right column. So it would be reduced to those amounts as listed. What it would also cover in this, because we often have a lot of AV asks of, well, can I get a microphone, or can we get a laptop, or can you help us get this set up? We'd like to just plan on including the AV equipment as we have it available as part of this. Larger items, whether it be a dance floor or staging or things where there's a lot of time and effort in terms of staff involved, that would have to be, or I would recommend that be not covered under the fee at this point. Much like I mentioned in our youth sports, all other deposits, fees, permits, and deadlines would apply. So if you need an alcohol permit, if you need a deputy, if you need anything else as part of that rental, that would still apply, and the fee reductions would not, wouldn't apply there. Times would need to be adhered to our standard hours. Again, we kind of have an 8 to 8 schedule during the weekdays. So if you're looking to have a 7 a.m. meeting, unfortunately, we would ask you to stay within that 8 to 8 timeline. Bringing staff in early isn't something we're supportive of. And then once again, all rentals would be subject to availability. We know that particularly this time of year, it is high demand. So working around that and making sure that we have the availability to accommodate would be crucial. Questions? All right. Again, we know that there are going to be a number, hopefully a small number of exceptions requested to this policy suggestion. With that being said, and the way I have it termed right now is that in some exceptional circumstances, programs that serve an altruistic essential mission or enhance the programs offered within the community center may be granted full fee waivers. I do think this would be on an application basis, and it needs to be commented, and I think it was brought up earlier, that these have to be extremely limited in order to preserve the impartiality, the clarity, and the consistency for everyone. The exceptions should demonstrate a specific value add and extend to a program and not a general group. Exceptions, again, we would go with a user agreement so that we can document the terms and the conditions, the deliverables, all of those things. And I would like to say that we have a couple of suggested programs that this would apply to. One would be our blood drives. We have quarterly blood drives, and bingo. Those are the two that come to mind directly. So, again, I know.
And I just want to be clear, the use of the use agreement or user agreement would be the exception. We're not going to open it up. We're not going to advertise it. We're not going to promote this. That's only going to be for those altruistic type based activities. And it would be, I love how Rachel's framed it where it's just either activity or program based and not just necessarily the organization. So this is something that would be easier for us to maintain and control.
Mm-hmm. That's everything I have specific to the community center. The other half of this discussion refers to special events. Are we ready to move in that direction?
Well, I think, and this is, I wanted to ask Aaron before he had to take off too, is, so we're going to be voting on direction, not on a literal policy right now. So I think we might be able to do it together and having there be enough flexibility. Thanks.
And thank you for that clarity, is that this is a direction. I'm looking to make sure that I'm on track with what you guys are looking for in the policy. So when I bring back that draft, it doesn't surprise you and you understand what's coming back.
We'll act surprised anyway.
So that being said, special events really isn't a whole lot different. It's just a different location. In an effort to try to keep things really simple and really consistent, we're at the same place. We would suggest that nonprofit groups, Fountain Hills based, would be eligible for a 50% fee reduction from the established nonprofit rates for special events as well. Again, this is just to kind of keep it simple. Fees for direct costs, just like at the community center, would not be eligible. So MCSO, road closures, Cleanup, logistic items, whether you need to bring in lights or you need to bring in restrooms, all of those things would still be there. We can't reduce those costs. This would be simply for the rental costs only. Same thing, reservation start and end times need to be accounted for in their entirety. Particularly when it comes to special events, a lot of setup and a lot of cleanup happens, depending on the size and the scale. I need to have that whole window accounted for in the time. If you're going to start delivering porta-johns, the clock starts. Because once they're on site, then they become part of the event, they become a nuisance, they become something we have to look after. So that has to be under that window. All events would be subject to the special event application. So whether there's a fee waiver or not, they still need to submit the application. They would still need to submit all of the requirements, including layouts, plans, insurance certificates, traffic control, all of the other pieces and components that make up a special event. It doesn't exempt them from the process. Our permit fees and damage deposits would not be eligible for the fee waiver, so we would still look to assess those because our deposits are just simply that. They are returnable and they're held for damage purposes. That last bullet, we would probably look to amend that, as noted earlier, that a proof of nonprofit status, whatever that is, would be requested. So pretty similar in concept. That being said, if we want to take a look at what those rates look like, that's here. Right now, we have what we call small, medium, and large events. They're loosely defined. A small event is usually less than 500 people, and it takes really little or no staff assistance to do it. It kind of happens, and it's, again, small scale. Generally speaking, if you have a wedding down at the park or you have a small group, something, I'll say, I think we've had a number of church groups down there, that this would apply here. So the left side is at current rates, and then the reduced rate is identified on the right. Medium events have some staff assistance, and they generally range from maybe 500 to about 2,500. We haven't had it recently, but if you remember our pet adoption event that we've hosted in the past, we have maybe 50 or 60 groups down there, and they adopt out 90 to 100 dogs that day. It's relatively small in impact and setup and things like that. It's one day, they're in and out. This would probably be the right scale for something like that, just to give you a visual.
Yeah, question. Small events, Fountain Hills nonprofits, 200 to 375 for a half or full day. Frankly, that strikes me as, for 500 attendees, I agree. Could we break it into two, be 250 attendees versus 500 attendees, and lower the price if it's less than 250 or something like that? Because you're going to have some small organizations that want to have space, and to say they have to pay $200 or $375 seems to me to be a bit high.
It's a good point, but also keep in mind, Rachel, if you can go back to the community center, some events are better suited for the community center, which is much more affordable. So they could actually do this in for $100 basically in the ballroom, and if it was 4 hours, it would be like maybe 400. So what I'm trying to say is we would try to talk them into maybe another option where it might be lower cost, but a lot of these events, even though it might be 500 people, it could be very impactful to the grass, and we may have to not be able to water, and there's some staff that might be involved in cleanup, even though they claim that they'll clean up. And I understand what you're saying. You're saying, can't we just say maybe we have a rate for half that size or whatever? So it's a good point, but I'm not sure. We've gone through quite a bit of analysis when we went through the fee study that you guys approved, that the council approved a year and a half ago. And so there's been a lot of, the fees took into consideration a lot of different things to be as flexible as possible. So I think that this is still a pretty good deal.
One other recommendation, and this goes just in line with that, is that if it is a small event, I'm going to say a 25-person wedding ceremony, we generally steer them towards a Ramada rental so that they have a space, they have a dedicated place outdoors, but they don't need the full Great Lawn. They don't need that kind of space in order to have that type of a ceremony. So that becomes an option as well. The last one is a large event, and I think that's what comes to mind for most people when we talk about our events. Our large events are, heck, the fair this last weekend is a super duper large event. We have the Concourse in the Hills, we have Oktoberfest, we have a number of events that would be considered large. And those would be 2,500 or more in attendance, lots of logistic impacts, whether, again, that's deliveries, bringing things in and outs. Sometimes it means media and designating a media space. Sometimes it means anticipating sometimes negative media. So we need to have like a demonstration area or somewhere where there's a free speech zone. So that does come with both sides of that coin. So we do have a number of large events.
I have a question, please. Given what you just said, and in the paragraph it says there's a separate user agreement between the town and like the Chamber of Commerce for events like this. What would that entail? Is that going to reduce the fees more? Or are there going to be one of those exceptions or?
I'm hopeful you're going to tell me, hold that thought, and that's the next slide, is to talk about when we get to an exception, the Chamber of Commerce is recommended to have a user agreement because they have so many events that they do here in the town, and they do so many partnered things. So with that in mind, I'm going to skip to the next slide here. But just as the last bullets here kind of indicate what we've already talked about, that they have to go through the special event process. It doesn't apply to deposits and things, and that they're all subject to review by the special event committee. So that being said, kind of the big piece of this discussion that has always kind of come up is the Chamber of Commerce. It's suggested that a user agreement be used because they are a contributor, and we do a number of collaborative things with them in partnership, in addition to all of the large-scale events that they do, which are kind of outlined here. That being said, this user agreement can look like whatever we think is reasonable and equitable. There's been discussion of whether there should be a flat fee, if it should be direct, a direct partnership where there is no financial exchange there. It outlines what we need from them in terms of the chamber from the town's perspective, and then what the town will provide in reverse. So I'm open to the concepts of what we would like that user agreement to look like, or we can take that to a separate discussion and bring the chamber and all of us kind of discuss with everybody at the table.
Well,
Questions?
I think that, yes, the chamber does bring a lot of business and do a lot of things, but to use Councilmember Spelge's term, there needs to be some skin in the game. I do think that they should have to pay for at least a fee because we're operating a business just like they are. They're using with these particular events and stuff, a large part of the downtown area that does cost the town a lot of money too. But I do think there should be some type of a fee involved in that.
Noted,
Mayor.
thank you.
Mayor.
Vice Mayor?
To try to avoid the mayhem we had over the sign ordinance, maybe we should sit down with them and have a negotiating session and see what comes out of it.
That's probably not a bad direction. I will say, to avoid the mayhem of the sign, I have been in touch with the chamber. Betsy and I have talked a little bit about this, and she wasn't able to come tonight and did ask a couple of questions, so she and I have talked. I let her know that this was the recommendation, but that I would need further direction from council to know what we were going to do.
All right, it's not directly applicable, but you've got the Fountain Festival, 2 Fountain Festivals. What are you doing about other art shows that are not chamber sponsored?
Great question. So a good example of that is Thunderbird Artists.
Is what?
Is Thunderbird Artists. We'll use them as an example because they also are a longtime vendor. I don't know that they are a nonprofit. I believe they are a for-profit. Therefore, they would be ineligible for these fee reductions.
Fee would be what?
Their fee would be based on the $3,500 per day.
You're going to move them right out of town. For example, I know Dixie Green, for example, is going to be doing a show. There's no way in the world she can afford that kind of thing. So, I mean, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm simply saying you're not going to have as many shows.
I knew this was going to come up. Let's not forget that what this town offers. You are going to find very few places that I know of in this entire state of Arizona that has the fountain, the avenue, and everything that the town has to offer. So I think we need to take that into consideration. I'm sorry, I've never attended the Thunderbird art thing. I don't know what their gig is, but I can just say that they can charge an admission fee. They charge an admission fee to get into Irish Fest. I didn't hear people say, I'm not going. I heard the turnout was good. I couldn't go, but, so I think that, once again, when we start, as the vice mayor says, you know, well, the Thunderbird artist, I don't know what Dixie is.
Dixie Green Promotions.
Okay. But where does it stop? Then we're going down that slope again of, I want this, I want that, I'm special, I'm special. There has to be, I just don't think that you're going to have people leave and find another venue such as we offer. So I think at some point we need to stick to our guns and say, if we lose one event or something like that, so be it.
Mayor?
Vice Mayor?
Those events, I mean, yes, I'm involved in those events, but I'm not saying it for me. I'm just saying that those events are good for the town. We have, I think, maybe five this year, 4 or 5, 2 Thunderbird, 2 Chamber, 1 Thunderbird, Dixie Green, I think there's one other, might be one other. Even Thunderbird, which is, in my view, the best promoter in the state, will not be able to do this. There's just no way. And an entry fee, they already charge an entry fee. It's nominal, doesn't amount to much. But if they charge, they're charging $3 a person. If they charge $10 a person, that's the end of the show. So I don't know the answer. I just know that we have to try to balance what we need to do to keep these shows in town. And also, by the way, they go to the restaurants and everything else. We get tax money from them. I understand we need to have income. The question is, how much?
I think what you're talking about, though, is exactly the problem we have, which is why we have to go to something like this, which is clear and fair. If they're, if they are or aren't nonprofit, they'll be in the same boat just like anybody else that needs the whole avenue, the fountain, or half of it. If they're nonprofit, they'll be eligible for the half off. I think when we talk about the chamber, that's getting together with them is exactly what we're talking about, which is making an agreement with them that will make sense. But it's not only going to talk about the stroll and the glow and the things that they do, but it's also, they don't charge us to be members. These are the factors that will go into whatever kind of agreement we have. So basically, they give all these free booths out to service organizations. The service organizations make money from having the booths. So that's why I see them a little bit differently than or a lot differently, really, than a show that comes here, that especially if it's a for-profit one. They hire, Boy Scouts, and and then the money goes to the Boy Scouts. So I think these things that I know some people were unmoved by when we talked about it earlier can go into whatever the eventual agreement is. So they do have what you would call skin in the game, but we need to recognize the value, and some of it is actual monetary value of what these fairs are, including the business licenses. The business licenses alone that they bring pay for what we would if we charged them the $21,000 or whatever it is. So I think that will all go into the mix to whatever that agreement becomes. But I get a little squirrely when we start talking again about, well, then this one goes till the has lunch or whatever, because then we're just going to hear that from no matter what we try to do. So I think this is a really good effort to try to make it very, very fair, kind of, black and white almost, but taking what you've been saying all the while into account before we would come up with whatever this user agreement thing is.
And I agree with you at some point, but where are you coming up with 21,000?
That was from, I think, the 35 plus 35 plus
The
35.
chamber wouldn't be included in that.
Well, I'm just saying
So
if we charge
my
them-
math is 1,750 times 4 is 7,000.
Well, I am looking at something from 2019, I think, so. It was
So,
before
I
we
mean,
changed our-
that's $7,000 for an event that draws 100,000 people. So, I mean, to me, $7,000 is really, I can't see how you.
I guess
And
what I'm
let me clarify too.
Sorry.
I'm pro-business, so I don't want anybody to say I'm not pro-business. Every vote that I've made on this council has been business-oriented, pro-business, from the signs down. So I don't want to get emails or phone calls from people saying you're anti-chamber. Betsy Lavoie knows I'm not anti-chamber, I've proved it. But $7,000 for a 4-day event where over 100,000 people supposedly come, I just can't see how you can stand in an argument like that.
Again, I think those things can come into play if we decide here that we're going to treat it as something that will have a user agreement, or whatever we call it. Because we're not going to hammer that out right now. We have a lot of things still on the agenda tonight, and I think what you're looking for is, yes, we're okay with kind of extricating the chamber out into something different, and how that ends up looking is still to be determined.
Okay. Yes, so taking them out of that equation, what's left, what we're looking at in terms of the rest of the events and the policy as a whole is what if there's any other direction or comments.
No, I would agree with what the mayor just said as well, and, pulling out a separate agreement with the chamber doesn't necessarily equate to zero cost to the chamber either. I mean, I think that's part of the discussions and the back and forth, and, maybe it's 7,000, maybe it's a little bit more, maybe it's less, we don't know, but, that's how I think it's going to play out, or would like to see it play out. I mean, would that type of an agreement, would just the chamber come back to us then, or is that a staff, or?
I think because it's a very contentious item, I would love to bring that back to the council rather than that being administrative. It doesn't have to. I think really what we really want to do is, I think what we would do is we would bring to you basically the major points of the terms and conditions that would be in it, and we would administratively do that agreement ourselves. But we would get consensus, or at least agreement from the council what needs to be in that document. So we don't think that's something we'd have to bring to you every year once we did this.
Do we have speaker cards?
We do. First one is Tammy Bell.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, and staff. My name is Tammy Bell. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Fountain Hills Cultural and Civic Association regarding the center special fee waiver policy. First, I'd like to bring to your attention, if you don't know, all of the programs that do currently fall under FHCCA's 501c3 that utilize the community center facilities. These programs are Encore, Dark Sky, Fountain Hills Leadership Academy, the Community Band, Community Chorus, Community Garden, Vision Fountain Hills, Public Art, and the Fountain Hills Community Foundation. Just from these programs alone, which involve about 400 members and volunteers, I've calculated that they use town facilities approximately 520 hours annually. While providing these services to hundreds of residents in our community, they are offering senior programming, dark sky education, town leadership education, public art consideration, and a lot of good old small town celebration and entertainment. All of these, which I know you'll agree with me, greatly contribute to the quality of life in Fountain Hills. But did you know that FHCCA programs also generously have given to the town facilities financially? Let me give you an example. $500,000 were donated for furnishings at the community center, $4,500 for bingo equipment, $2,500 for the medical equipment shed, $1,500 for the new lighting in the lobby, volunteers to support home delivery meals and give a lift, and we've partnered with the town for new adventures trips by paying for the bus admin fee and tickets for staff. Again, these examples are not complete, they're just a few of them, but to share these facts is to draw a picture for you, the relationship that we have had with FHCCA and the town from the beginning of time. As a matter of fact, this partnership began pre-incorporation when the Civic Association employed Evelyn Bredding to manage the first community center, and in exchange, we got to use the facility for whatever we saw fit. After the town assumed the responsibility of the community center, it was Paul Norden that chose to continue this relationship with the Civic Association by allowing us to use the center as long as we offered activities that were free and to the community at large. I am in no way suggesting that you continue to allow us to use the community center the way that they had in the past. What I am asking is that you would honor the relationship we've had for such a long time. And it's been a generous and complementary partnership that we've had with the town. So with that, this is my request. I've talked to Rachel at length. I just want to ask the town council to give her the direction to work with FHCCA, to talk to us about what programs do fit and partner with the town to fulfill our mission about adding these quality of life programs, and then continue a user agreement for those programs, not all of FHCCA, but those programs that Rachel sees fit as the town has partnered with in the past. Thank you.
Are we allowed to respond because it's okay. I think that's perfectly reasonable. One of the problems I understand with the FHCCA use of the community center is they started out as a small organization and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we went from offering the services to this group. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's like, I want to be a part of the FHCCA because they get to use the services for free. So I feel like we need to find a happy medium. And my personal opinion is what you just said gets us there, because you just keep adding nonprofits or whatever we want to call them to that particular umbrella. You're defeating the purpose. There's no cost recovery for us at all. So I feel like you've had a good compromise there. Thank you.
Rachel, do you have anything that you would want to add to that? Oh, I'm sorry.
I do have two written comments.
Oh, okay, thank you.
One is from Deb Fisher. She says, on behalf of the Fountain Hills Community Band, we are very grateful to the town for having allowed us the usage of the ballroom to hold our concerts. We were able to grow our audience. We receive our income by donation at the door. We are set to perform December 19th, 2021. And then the other is from Jerry Butler. The town's mission statement includes respecting its special small town character and quality of life. One of Fountain Hill's special small town characteristics is its multitude of volunteer services that save the town thousands of dollars every year. Volunteerism is truly a unique feature of a small town and a quality of life that larger communities don't enjoy. Charging 501c3 organizations to use the community's center makes no sense, unless small town charm and quality of life are no longer important to the town. Why is it so important to now make the community center a for-profit business center?
Thank you. Any others? Rachel?
I did want to comment. I noted the date of the performance for the community band, and I did want to draw attention to the fact that this, obviously, this policy is not on your agenda tonight. Nor is it going to probably make an agenda in December. This would be a first of the year, conversation. if and when it was adopted at that time, I wouldn't recommend implementing it for our groups until probably July 1, the start of the new fiscal year. So it gives us plenty of time to have these conversations, to make folks aware of any changes that may impact them. So it's not a, implementation, the day after adoption kind of a thing. So we would work with that date.
I would also suggest that when we come back with a policy, that maybe we will have some other points about what maybe one or two of these user agreements might have, and then try to get consensus or try to get council to give us better direction on those so that we can then finalize negotiating those. But we'll let you know for sure what those points are before we ever get an agreement.
I think it would be good when we do come back to be able to articulate by charging 50%, how much of a cost recovery that would be. I don't think we're going to come close to what we put into the community center. We just spent $800,000 on the community center. So I think it would be good and helpful to possibly put some figures together on what it costs us, and if we implement these changes, how much we plan on getting back of that. And I think it's going to be such a small amount, but free is ludicrous.
Yeah, I'd like to see that number as well, but personally, I would not include the renovation of the community center. That's not.
He was just mentioning it.
Oh, you just mentioned it? Oh, okay, all right. I'd like to know what it costs us each year in total, so we know what we're dealing with here.
Sure. What I can offer now is I can kind of give you the numbers in terms of overall fee waivers for the community center. Looking at and it's hard, again, we haven't had a normal year. We haven't had a normal almost 2 years at this point. But if you take into account kind of the previous, we push close to $50,000 in fee waivers in what we currently are waiving. We aren't looking to make that up. I can answer that. But what I would be happy to do is bring back a couple of sample versions of, if we offer this program at a reduced rate, this is what it costs us versus this is what it would be, brought in terms of revenue.
Isn't the fee schedule that we just, recently approved, that was an indication of the cost of these things. So we were not allowed for that to have us make money. So to David's point, these things that say full price are what it costs us. That's not making money.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Mayor. The council decided to go as close to full cost recovery when you adopted the fees, 18 months ago or so. That went into effect, was it in 2020, July 1st of 2020?
It did.
So the other thing I want to make a point about, and Rachel did a great job of explaining this, as far as the delay of implementation, I really feel that legally there's a difference between just waiving fees, but these are arbitrarily, these fees are arbitrary up here. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but the reduction of 50%, we don't even have this in our fee schedule. So actually, council needs to formally adopt this, and we can do that as part of this, so that goes into effect July 1st, but we actually need to have this in the fee schedule. Fee waivers are different, that's already addressed in our town code where that can be done. So I think this is all really good, and I'm glad that you suggested possibly having this be implemented in July.
Mayor, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Let's assume we don't bring in 1 penny. What does it cost to run the community center?
Well,
right where?
We'll bring that. I don't believe we have that off the top of our head, but we'll bring that back.
I don't mean this minute. But I would like to get that.
And then just to follow up on the point about the cost recovery concept, the fees that were set, you're right, they're made to offset costs, not quite 100%, but the fees that we are adopting for our nonprofits are lower than that threshold. And then this goes a layer lower even further. So just keeping that in mind. So it's a quarter of cost recovery.
Thank you. Yeah, that's that's for a nonprofit there.
Yes.
So what do you want us to do with this motion?
Watch your language.
I believe the motion is fine, the way the suggested motion is. But what I would add is that we come back with some negotiation points to include in the user agreements.
So we'll draft a
And
template.
so that way you'll have the opportunity to see what those might be and to discuss those.
Okay. Somebody would able to tackle that on page 417, please?
So are G and H separate?
Yeah, well.
It's two
we did-
separate motions?
Actually, the council already adopted.
did G.
You
Okay,
did
because that's
AG.
not actually wasn't even a motion. Okay.
So I'll just read it. Move to direct staff to develop a final draft of the fee waiver policy with the policy direction received from the town council. And to come back at a later date to the council with recommended negotiated points to include in user agreements.
I move to what he just said.
And I can't repeat it, I just forgot it.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you for your time.
So I want, if staff will forgive me, I'd like to ask if we could have Jack come up and do the legislative agenda. Thank you for making that suggestion, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. As Jack is coming up, I just wanted to let the council know that this is kind of an exciting thing. In the last few years, the council's become much more active in providing some direction on positions related to proposed legislation, both in opposition to and also in support of. And this is the first time ever that we've had a legislative policy agenda. Most of all the big, larger cities in the valley, from Phoenix, Scottsdale, even Buckeye, has a legislative policy agenda. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jack. Jack's been waiting all evening for this opportunity. But he's going to go ahead and he has a presentation set to give you. But I think what we have is a really good first start on this. And if there's anything that you wish to either add or amend, this is the opportunity to do it. Because we're looking at getting this adopted tonight so that we can be ready to start monitoring bills in January. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lunsford.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council, and it's been great to work with Grady on this because, as he just outlined, the significance of this for someone like me or others who represent organizations is to provide guiding principles, but also have them not so specific that we don't have the latitude to move in and out the legislative process. Example, 1,750 bills were introduced last year. 300 and almost 400 bills were signed by the governor, and I think there were 28 that were vetoed. We need to have something that gives me the flexibility to work with Grady during the course of a legislative session so that we can best represent the town. So I think, do I have something up yet?
Staff will come up and try to get the presentation on for you.
Yeah.
It should be on the desktop.
Oh, it's on the desktop. I'm sorry. There we go. There we go.
Before you begin with 1487.
Yes, yes. We'll talk about it, but 1487 is pretty onerous upon municipal governments. What we really tried to do in creating this legislative agenda is base it on this mission: enriching and providing an active quality of life for all residents and visitors within the town. And so that was the basis for it. And we used these strategic these priorities in the strategic plan that the town has already adopted, again, to help guide where we've been. What I want to do is acknowledge what the League of Cities has already adopted for 2022, and in that, have that incorporated into our legislative agenda for 2022, so that we are supporting what the league has agreed to do. Now, some of them may or may not be specific to the town of Fountain Hills, but what it does is it puts us in the position of being a team player. So you can see what these are, giving the state or amending the statute to specify a period when cities and towns may prohibit the use of fireworks, which was in last year, and allow the cities and towns to amend their budgets after the initial budget passes. And other political subdivisions have that authority. And then to seek legislative or non-legislative solutions on housing and homelessness, that's an issue, as many of you know, through the continuum of care at MAG, and that's incorporated. It's looking for statutory changes, but there's nothing specific yet. And then simplify the statutory mechanisms regarding water and water districts if there's a need to dissolve them. So the core principles, again, and these, I've been doing this for 40 years. I have heard protect state shared revenues and oppose preemption of local authority. And in fact, when I represented Maricopa Community Colleges, both of those were core to what we were always trying to do. As a reminder, here's what we had just in 2021. And you'll see in comparison to what we're proposing tonight, we were looking at preserving revenue sharing at least 15%, which was under consideration, possible jeopardy at one time. Mr. Vice Mayor, Senate Bill 1487 is what allows legislators to seek investigations on the actions of municipalities. In the legislation that the court struck down, it actually allowed them to go into your policies, your procedures. Everything that was just discussed by Ms. Goodwin would have been subject to an investigation. And if and I won't go into this much further, other than if the town didn't comply with the recommendations of the investigation, they would be subject to losing their state shared revenues. That's how intense and significant this legislation is. So the provision that was in the bill that was struck down by the Supreme Court at least took it back to what it is today, which is just your actions.
Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Lunsford. Who was the legislator that chaired that or pushed that bill?
Council members Belich, I believe that was Senator Leach. But I don't want to go on record. So I know I'm on record. That's why you withdraw the question, and I will withdraw the speculation. But if you'd like me to find out, I'll be happy to do it.
Well, I think just to be clear, though, 1487 is in existence right now for anything that we do.
Correct.
So basically, that's why we don't have the stormwater fee anymore, because we were threatened with that. But this 1487 that was reversed, thank goodness, from the Supreme Court or the Superior Court or whatever it was because it was going to extend to staff and anything that you did as a town. So if they don't like that she wants to charge anything, then somebody that lives in Yuma could say, we don't like Fountain Hills is charging to use their park. Put a 1487 on us. If the, Attorney General decides they agree, we're in big trouble. And that does still exist as far as our actions.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, last session, we supported legislation to address the negative impacts of short-term rental. You may recall I reported on that previously when I was here, and then also on the permissible use of consumer fireworks. Unfortunately, those bills didn't pass last session. So as we move forward into 2022, we've lumped them into categories. And so in terms of local government, you see clearly at the top, not only do we want to oppose anything that expands the legislative authority, and you'll hear me at the end say, things come back. We call it in our business poltergeist. They do come back. So we want to support legislation that further limits 1487 if in fact that is introduced. Oppose legislation that creates any unfunded mandates, and then support legislation on political signs that comply with the Supreme Court decision Reed versus Town of Gilbert. In terms of local government finance, oppose legislation that reduces or negatively impacts our state shared revenues in any way, shape, or form. Also oppose changing the imposition of construction sales taxes to materials only, which I'm pretty confident that will be introduced this session. There is an organization that does that just about every year. In terms of neighborhood and quality of life issues, legislation that adds additional tools or remedies for municipalities to regulate short-term rentals. We already mentioned that. Oppose any legislation that restricts our current zoning authority, in particular in residential areas. Oppose legislation that would prohibit or eliminate transaction privilege taxes on renting or leasing real property for residential purposes. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Jack, I'm sorry. Oppose legislation that would limit or curtail the town's current zoning authority. What does that mean? What could it mean?
The legislative process is a creative one. We know that in the past, there have been attempts to limit, modify, curtail what a town can do in terms of zoning authority. I think Grady wants to.
I have a real life one that happened, I think it was 3 years ago. The legislature had a bill that was going to open up the possibility of home-based businesses where you could have manufacturing, chemical-based kind of activities, and automotive types of repairs that would be commercial type activities in residentially zoned areas.
Right next door to you.
Exactly. And so that's the type of thing sometimes that happens, and that's why we have that on there.
Yeah, and to that point, I forgot about that bill, but to that point, they have no qualms about preempting the authority of local government, but boy, do they hate the federal government imposing anything upon them. And then oppose legislation that preempts the town's ability to adopt or enforce ordinances regulating tobacco, vapor products, et cetera. That bill was highly contentious last year. I was lobbied on both sides of that bill. It did not pass, but I'm pretty confident that it will be back in some form this next session. In terms of public safety, we want to make sure that legislation is not introduced that impacts the town's fire code or our ability to enforce the fire code. We want to oppose legalizing fireworks. And to that end, opposing it is certainly one way to address it. There's a possibility that, maybe we go back to what we had in 2021, which is probably a compromise position that limits the amount of, or the times that it can be used.
Yeah, Jack, if I may, I can understand we want to propose things and support things, but all of those that say oppose, are those, you have some reason to believe that those are going to be bills?
I'm sorry, say the last part.
You have some reason to believe that those will be bills? There'll be legislative language for all those that say oppose?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. And we want to be on the record to impose them because, again, I would have the flexibility to go to before the legislature and say, the town of Fountain Hills opposes these specific things. And again, we want to preserve local control, which is the last one we have there in that area. In terms of transportation, MAG has passed a recommendation to move forward with the extension of the half-cent sales tax, the existing Prop 400. We want to be in a position to support that because legislation will be required in Maricopa County to call for that election. That's not true in the other counties.
And I just want to point out that we have in the plan, the 25-year plan, we have, I believe it's close to $60 or $70 million worth of transportation projects. So a lot's riding on this. And again, this is not a new tax. This is just the extension of the current one.
Also, the legislature has been known to raid the Highway User Revenue Fund. I think the legislature did put some money back in this year, but over the last 12 years, I believe it's down about $1.2 billion. And so every time they try to go in and raid it, impacts the formula which distributes money to municipalities. So real quick, just what's coming. I'm sorry, okay. So because of the Supreme Court's single subject ruling, which I've been calling for years, that means that a lot of bad bills are going to come back. And what I mean by that is there were bills that didn't get enough votes to pass in either chamber, but leadership negotiated putting those bills into the appropriations bill in order to get the votes of the particular senators or representatives. The Supreme Court's ruling on single subject, goes back to what the Constitution says, which the bills can only be a single subject. Having said that, all of those, quote, bad bills will likely resurface again this coming year. We can't emphasize enough on short-term rentals. I have had conversation with Coconino County, which was a leader a couple of years ago on this issue. Just this past week, the city of Sedona has retained someone such as me for that express purpose, to deal with that. We think there's going to be more preemption attempts. The composition of the legislature is already changing. I've lost count. There was another one who resigned the other day, so I think that's 10, which means more than 10% of the legislature has resigned. Two other things that just affect the process. One is redistricting. People are going to be trying to figure out where they're going to run from next year, and next year is an election year. Prognosticators are talking about this being a very long session. So in closing, I will say I have been a part of the 9 longest legislative sessions in state history, and I really don't want to be part of the 10th. So, Mayor and Council, this would be the document that we would use. I think it's really important. Grady prefaced it really well for us to have this. I got contacted today by the utility that is not a public utility, but it's a water users association, who wondered about what we were doing in terms of a legislative agenda. I refused to share it until we took action, but that's the significance of it. So I'll be happy to stand for any more questions.
Thank you, Jack, very much. Any questions? Yes, Mike.
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. Under the quality of life issues, well, first of all, I agree with the emphasis here and all the different bullet points. I think they're all good and valid things to either support or oppose. And under the quality of life one, I know there's a bill that's going to be introduced trying to regulate a little bit more advertising on recreational marijuana. And I know on the initiative that passed, by the voters, they even carved out some exceptions in there as far as, advertising dispensaries and that can do, and it's even more liberal than, tobacco and alcohol and that kind of thing. So I just kind of, I don't know if we want to put that in there per se, or just, maybe keep that on the radar if there's some bills coming up dealing with marijuana that, we kind of just be apprised of that or whatever.
Chuck, could you just put that bullet back up, and maybe we could just quickly wordsmith it? I think we can, and just amend that. So there on the bottom.
The last bullet point, yes.
So we could probably, we could probably add something if we wanted to, maybe, that maybe encompasses advertising? Or is that where you're going?
Yeah, advertising, and I don't know if you need to spell out recreational marijuana, but that was kind of the emphasis on at least that.
Why don't we, maybe that's really a unique thought. Let's just make that a separate bullet. And maybe oppose legislation that, that promotes or increases the use of recreational marijuana? Or
Yeah,
do you have something you could?
I think the bill, actually, we would support this bill because it would help curtail.
Oh, okay.
The
So
advertising.
support.
Yeah.
So that might be,
So
because what we're
support,
saying is we want local control, but if the state comes out and says they want us to limit advertising, then that might not be something we would want to oppose. Was that what you're saying? Because if we support it, then we're supporting preemption, basically, even though whatever the topic is, so it's kind of a sticky thing.
What, Mayor and Council Member Charno, if I can make a suggestion, we will begin to see legislation, what's called dropped, here in the next month. We'll begin to get a sense of what that is, and legislature will have to introduce bills by the third week in January, I think. So it could be that I need to come back to you and speak to anything specific if you would like. That's your pleasure. It's really hard to anticipate what 1,700 of them are going to look like. I think if I can use by illustration, when I was with Maricopa Community College's conversation I had with the chancellor was, you need to give me my boundaries, which essentially this is. I can move anywhere I need to go within those boundaries. If there, for some reason, something arises that I have to go outside those boundaries, I will check with you. So that was the arrangement that we had, and I'm certainly open to have that with Grady and council, however you, whatever your pleasure is.
I don't know if this makes a lot of sense or not, but if we could, as we go through this process, get some sense as to, one, has it been introduced before? How many times it's been introduced? And which ones do you think are really serious? I'm sure there's going to be frivolous with that many pieces of legislation. A lot of it's frivolous, and just they want to go tell their constituents that they tried. But if we could get some kind of analysis so we can key in on the ones that we think are the most problematic and the most probable, I think that could be helpful.
So we've been talking about that, and certainly I would be prepared to do that.
So you bring up a really good point, and I know, Alan, you've actually have listened in on the Monday morning calls on that the league has. So basically, what we start off with each year, all the legislative, all the government relations directors and managers and mayors, they basically look at the league and what the league does, because they have a number of staff that are on staff that do nothing but legislative analysis, and then we start off with that. And they have what we call the weekly bulletin that they put out. Then we kind of focus on the things that really have the most impact on municipalities. And if you remember right, we started, to your point, we started like a table or a matrix that had the bills, what short term it was, or what the short name was, and then its impact. And we could actually add another column to do what you're kind of like, this was also introduced last year, or this is the third time in 5 years that this has been introduced. And then we can use that, and when we come before council, we can have that on your agenda, and you can help us, the council can, with prioritizing, because that's what we're really asking for.
Right.
Because even though we have our government affairs person here and our lobbyist is going to be spending more time than he has in the past representing our interests, it would be helpful for him to get that direction.
I think that'd be helpful.
And I will now be on the Monday morning calls as well, through working.
We had to actually request, because they weren't trusting of him because he was not a staff person, and we had to say, look, he's our contracted staff person, so.
So in the interest of time, could we make a motion on this with the knowledge that when individual bills come, just like we did last year and the year before, we will take positions on them as needed. Some of them we'll have to hurry up and do something about. Some of them we will say, yeah, that one's not going to happen. But that's where your guidance comes in too, to individualize this more to Fountain Hills than we've been able to maybe on our own. And but as far as what was been presented, are there any speaker cards for this item? No. Is anybody prepared to make a motion then, please?
What's the motion?
It's on page 317, move to approve 2022 legislative agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Jack, so much. We appreciate you
Thank you all. In
coming out
case
and
I don't see
explaining
you,
all this stuff to us.
have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to carry on, or everybody okay?
Is there a break?
Do you want to take a break? Okay, 5, take,
Let's.
you're the one got up. Okay, 8:25?
10?
8:30.
of people watching us.
So this is about speed limit on El Pueblo.
Yes, really quickly, Mayor and Council, our town engineer, David Janover, will provide a staff report on this recommended speed limit change for El Pueblo. Just wanted to also let the council know that this went through the Pedestrian and Traffic Safety Committee for its review and also its recommendation before coming to you before the council tonight. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Janover.
Thank you, Grady.
And he has instructions to be quick tonight.
I do. I do. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm glad to be here to present on this potential speed limit change on El Pueblo Boulevard. So this was brought to our attention earlier this year that the speed limit on El Pueblo Boulevard is 35 miles per hour, and that differs from the speed limit on Grande Boulevard nearby, which has a speed limit of 30 miles per hour, even though the roads are very similar in nature. And so we were asked if the town would consider lowering the speed limit on El Pueblo from 35 to 30 miles per hour to match that of Grande Boulevard. So to answer that question, the town prepared a speed study on El Pueblo Boulevard. So the first part of tonight's presentation, very brief presentation, will be to review the speed limit study, a full copy of which can be found in your council packets. And that's going to be followed by a review of the text amendment, which is required for any modification to any speed limit within the town. So again, the existing speed limit on El Pueblo is 35 miles per hour. The existing speed limit on Grande Boulevard is 30. The road characterization is essentially the same. So we're trying to consider setting a consistent speed limit between the two. And so what we did is we performed a speed limit study where we looked at speed data, we looked at crash data, and engineering methodology in setting speed limits. So the roadway characterizations of both El Pueblo Boulevard and the Grande Boulevard corridors are 60-foot wide curb-to-curb, 3-lane sections, consisting of two 14-foot wide through lanes, a 16-foot center turn lane, and two 8-foot shoulders, which are used for off-street parallel parking. This is pretty much just a map showing the area that we're talking about. So El Pueblo Boulevard is shown here in black, and it's the section between Fountain Hills Boulevard and Grande Boulevard. And then we have Grande Boulevard down here in the blue, which goes east-west, and it goes from Saguaro to El Pueblo Boulevard, right by the town line. So if we look further at the roadway character, El Pueblo Boulevard between Fountain Hills Boulevard and Grande have direct driveway accesses along the entire corridor on both sides of the roadway. And pretty much we're talking about row houses, one house after the other, driveway after driveway after driveway on both sides. So the density of driveways are rather high. And we have a similar situation on Grande Boulevard, pretty much from Del Cambre, which is about over here, towards the east town line. So about the eastern 2/3 of Grande Boulevard is the same type of high driveway density in that area. So we collected speed limit data at 3 locations along the El Pueblo Boulevard corridor, and they're shown over here in these yellow dots. So the upper left one here is west of Wiley Drive. This one here is west of Baca Drive, and this one here is south of Huron Lane. And then we also took another speed limit data collector on Grande Boulevard down here, which is just west of Arrowweed Drive, just to get a baseline comparison. And we collected this data between June 2nd and June 8th, the 1 week earlier this year in 2021. So looking at the speeds that came out of this data, so when we look at speed data, and you've probably heard this term before, we concentrate on what's called the 85th percentile speeds. And that's just the speed at which 85% of free-flowing traffic is traveling at or below. And that's typically what we do when we talk about speeds. So if we take a look at what we measured along El Pueblo, 44 miles per hour, at Wiley, 43 miles per hour, at Baca, 39 miles per hour at Huron, and then on Grande, 39 miles per hour, just west of Arrowweed. So again, the 85th percentile is really a starting baseline for setting the speed limit. And it could be adjusted down based on roadway factors. And we have a number of roadway factors here that are pretty significant. And that includes horizontal curves, the high driveway density, which I discussed earlier, if it's a rural, residential, or developed area where there's a higher potential for pedestrian and bicycle traffic, which we do have, and crash frequency. So let's take a look at some of the crash data real quick. So we collected crash data for the 5-year period from 2016 through 2020 along the El Pueblo Boulevard corridor, and you can see a heat map over here. And here is El Pueblo. Let's see, right here, it's coming down here. That's El Pueblo right there. So we have 22 reported crashes along El Pueblo Boulevard, and that's just the crashes that were reported over the 5-year period. Most likely there were more, but they just weren't reported. But of those 22, 2 of them were related to speeds that were too fast for the roadway conditions. And the crashes occur throughout the corridor, especially at the curved sections. So over here, you can see at this curve, there's a bunch of crashes in this area. You can see over here, we have a bunch of curves over here where it goes from east to south, and then over here, approaching Fountain Hills Boulevard. So when we take into account these roadway factors, the curves, the driveway density, the pedestrian activity, and the crash frequency, this table that you see here shows the measured 85th percentile speeds in the middle column, and then the speeds adjusted down by 10 miles per hour, taking into account these significant factors. And those are the speeds that are highlighted. So the reduced highlighted speeds on El Pueblo Boulevard, which are 34 miles per hour, 33, 29, those are generally in alignment with the potential posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour. So it does support that. And the reduced highlighted speed for Grande Boulevard, which is the bottom one here, the 29 miles per hour, that's already in alignment with the posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour that already exists on Grande Boulevard. So with that, staff does make a recommendation to reduce the speed limit on El Pueblo between Fountain Hills Boulevard and Grande Boulevard from 35 to 30 miles per hour. And again, as our town manager stated earlier, this speed study was presented to the Traffic and Pedestrian Safety Committee on August 24th, and they did concur with the staff recommendation. So the modification of any speed limit in the town requires an amendment to the speed limit list, an excerpt which is shown here, which resides in Chapter 12, Article 12-2, Section 1222C of our municipal code. So this, again, is a portion of that list, and you can see the listing here for El Pueblo Boulevard. We're just looking to modify that from 35 miles per hour to 30. So if town council is in favor of reducing the speed limit on this section of El Pueblo Boulevard, the action required would be to adopt Ordinance 21-19, incorporating this speed limit change. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Can you tell me how many schools are on El Pueblo?
Someone else can, I'm sorry.
One.
Is it still open? I don't think it's open. How many crosswalks are there on that?
I would have to look at the map. I don't know offhand. I haven't seen any.
One.
One crosswalk?
One crosswalk
By the school? By the school.
And how many complaints did we get from residents that the speed was too high on there?
One.
I had heard of one.
Okay, and then your slide showed that there were 2 crashes for speed in the last 5 years.
2 that were attributable to speeds that were too fast for the roadway conditions.
Right. Okay.
So right now, the posted speed is what?
35 miles per hour.
Okay. And based upon your analysis, it looked like a lot of the cars were going much faster than that.
Yes, the 85th percentile speed, if I back up to that, was 44, 43, and 39 miles per hour.
What makes you think that lowering it to 30 is going to affect those speeds?
Well, the mayor, vice mayor, the reason why we were looking at this in the first place is because someone did notice that there was a discrepancy between, an inconsistency between the speeds that we have on Grande Boulevard and on El Pueblo. And the one thing that kind of really hit me the most was the a number of driveways that we have on both sides of the road, really the entire corridor. And 35 miles per hour is something that we would normally see on a collector road. And just to let you know, we have local roads, collector roads, and arterials. So a collector is something that just brings traffic from the local roads to the arterials. So they go from locals, typically to a collector, to an arterial, then to a freeway. Typically, a collector road, which has 35 miles an hour, does not have a lot of driveways associated with it. Typically, it's at the perimeter or between subdivisions where you have a lot of perimeter walls, and that's typically what you see. You see the 3-lane roadways with a 2-way left turn lane or a center turn lane, and those typically do have higher speeds associated with them. However, over here we do have a number of factors, which are the density of driveways and the curves, and that's where we do see the crashes.
You know, problem I have, and not just with this one, is I really have a problem putting up speed limits that absolutely nobody obeys. What's the point of lowering it to, I'm not saying I'm against it to make it consistent, what's the point of making it 30 when people are gonna go 44? I mean, this happens all over this town. Even the safety corridors, fine, it's 45 miles an hour. Once you get out of the safety corridor, they're going 55 miles an hour. And so what?
Oh, I thought you wanted to say.
Oh, so I don't know what to do with this. I just don't think it's gonna make any difference.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I live on El Pueblo, drive down it numerous times a day. The key to reducing traffic accidents, speaking from a law enforcement perspective, you're speaking from an engineer's perspective, the key to lowering accidents, the key to mostly all of that is enforcement. You can keep the speed at 35 and just ask Captain Kratzer, just like they've reduced the speed on Saguaro dramatically, another road I drive all the time. If you keep the speed at 35 and you just enforce it, and word gets out that the MCSO is enforcing it, you're going to get a reduction in speed, guaranteed. I'm telling you, 30 miles an hour on that big road, you're driving so slow, it's like you're waiting for the hearse and the flower car to catch up, okay? I'm telling you, it's too slow. It's not going to make any difference. 22 accidents in 5 years, 2 of which are speed related. One just recently, somebody wiped out a boulder in somebody's yard. I'm going to go out on a limb and maybe say alcohol was a factor. Don't know for sure, but maybe alcohol was a factor. I concur with the Vice Mayor. If you don't have enforcement, you can make the speed limit anything you want, unless you have an enforcement component behind it. And that road is too big, too long for 35 miles an hour. For 30. Sorry, I know that goes against what your principles are, but and for all of this to come from one resident writing an email or calling somebody or something, people complain about the speeds in this town all the time. And we're not adjusting things, we're just asking MCSO, please make that a priority. Please put a car there. Please write some tickets. I think everyone would agree that the speed on Saguaro has reduced dramatically because they just pounded it every day. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
I'm kind of with the Vice Mayor. I'm not really sure what to do with this. Did I understand that the width of both Grande and El Pueblo are the same?
Yes.
Okay, I thought they were, and someone argued with me on that, but I won't mention any names because he seems shocked right now. Okay, so that being said, I always thought it was kind of weird that the Grande was 30 and El Pueblo was 35, but honestly, I honestly don't know how to deal with this because I'm not the best speed follower anyway. That's why I have the crews on the car. So I will listen to you guys talk amongst yourselves a little bit more.
First of all, if you look at the list of all of these streets, you'll see El Lago there, you'll see El Pueblo 35, El Lago 30, Palomino 30. So if you go with the description of what kind of streets they are, that's exactly why they're 30, because there's driveways that go straight out on them. They're not collectors, they're neighborhood streets, they're just really wide. We've been trying to deal with it by, in a cheaper way, like trying to stripe it. Justin's been doing an amazing job because that can kind of psychologically keep you inside. We've talked about putting sidewalks in eventually and curbing them and things like that, which you might be able to do, because the reason the pedestrian and traffic safety committee is in existence is because of all of these issues. But it's not fair really to say that they haven't been enforcing, because we had a report from Captain Kratzer that showed how they've been enforcing quite a bit. But I do agree that when, someone gets the message, that it's a high fine, and that's one of the things. I guess what I'm saying is, do you just, then you throw your hands up that someone's gonna speed, that let's just not have a speed limit? I think we go, there's not just one answer. There's an answer where you do this sort of thing, where you're changing speed limits that are appropriate for the streets that they're on, and then you enforce as much as you can with the resources you have, which has been what we've been pounding at our committee for, a year and a half or so. So that's the reasoning. I don't see it as different from El Lago. I don't see it as different from Palomino. It's the width, and that does make you want to speed.
Just
Yes.
point of clarification, I never said MCSO doesn't enforce this, they don't enforce speed.
No.
I didn't say that. I complimented them on
Right,
the great
the
job they did on
saguaro,
Swirl.
right. But you said that is the number one way to get them to stop, and so this
Well, if you
increased
don't believe me,
enforcement-
the captain's here, you can ask him, we can get it from him
Right,
real
but
time if you don't think I know what I'm talking
I guess my point is that
about.
we've had increased enforcement in the town, and we're working on that,
Mayor?
Yes.
I guess I pretty much agree with Councilman Spellich on this, that enforcement is the key. But let's say you enforce on a small street like this, for how long? 2, 3 days, a week? Guaranteed that once there are no presence of police cars, it's going to go right back to where it was. And I don't have an answer. I said that. I said it from the beginning. I don't have an answer. But I think it might be interesting if we lower it to 30 and monitor it and see what the speed of the cars is after that. I think it'll be exactly what it is today.
Then what, you're going to increase it if they...
That's all well and good, so we lower the speed limit and then monitor it, and nobody lowers their speed limit, so would we increase it back to 35? What's the point of monitoring it?
The point is to prove a point, which is without enforcement, without regular enforcement, it's going to go right back to where it was.
Can we just raise the speed on Grande?
I'll vote for that.
Do we have any speaker cards on this? No. Okay. Any other further discussion, Grady?
Yes, I feel really bad for our new town engineer that this is his first time before you, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get him to come back, but I think it's very clear what we're hearing from some of the council members. I do think, though, what the attempt here was to standardize on these collector streets and these very unique streets that have what I would describe as curve and linear design, and also so many of the homes have driveways. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people pull into their garages straight forward and they back out onto El Pueblo and some of these other streets. So the blind spots that they encompass on these streets, and the fact that it's not consistent with other speed limits that previous councils adopted for similar streets, I think that's all that the town engineer was just trying to bring to your attention. We understand, and I absolutely agree with Councilmember Spellich, that enforcement is really the key if you really want to slow down traffic. Another thing that you could do, but we're not suggesting it, and I don't think, I'm sure that the neighbors would tar and feather me for even thinking about this, would be like speed humps or speed tables or other things like that. And we're not even trying to get down that path. We're just trying to address something where we have consistency and uniformity for these types of streets.
Well said.
First off, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, I mean, you're not special, I do this to everybody. So don't be mad, that's just me. But, and I hope you come back.
I'll be back.
But you know what, I would be completely for if you want to put in rumble strips or you want to put in some speed reducing thing, if that blind corner or that, I don't consider it a blind corner, but if you think that sweeping corner on El Pueblo is the issue, then how can we deal with the corner instead of the whole entire length? That's, you know, I mean, I of course I don't want to spend more money, but I mean, if it would be easy, like a rumble strip, or Justin knows, and you guys know more about how to reduce speed, but if that is an option, but I just think to just lower the whole entire length of that street, I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense.
Mayor?
That's my son.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Oh, sure.
I'm going to make a motion, and the reason for the motion is if standardization is so important, I'm going to move that we lower it to 30, knowing full well it isn't going to make any difference in the statistics, but I'll move that we lower it to 30.
So is that to adopt ordinance 21-19? I'll second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Thank you. All in favor? I guess we'll do a roll call, please. Sorry, Liz. Caught you.
Mayor Dickey?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Magazine? Councilmember Grozbowski?
Nay.
Councilmember Spellich?
Nay.
Councilmember Charno?
Aye.
Councilmember Friedel?
Nay.
Councilmember McMahon? Motion passes 4-3.
Thank you. Our next item is 8C, which is consideration of proposed grant program. Grady?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, you recall last year during the peak of the pandemic, the town was able to receive some CARES Act funding. The CARES Act funding was used to help fund a small business assistance grant program of $300,000. That was successfully implemented by the Economic Development Department. We are proposing to do something very similar to that for nonprofits. The nonprofits were not eligible to get in on that grant funding last year. This would be the same model. It would be $300,000. We presented this concept to the council back in September as a concept to just get your input and ensure that this was something that would be doable. The feedback we had at that meeting was that the council didn't see any issues with this. We're looking at, this would be available to 501 based, I'm sorry, 501c based organizations. There would be fraternal organizations like the veterans organizations, also organizations like Kiwanis and Rotary, Women's Club, Women's League, Fountain Hills, charitable organizations in town, Boys and Girls Club, and also the food bank as examples, as well as things like the theater and the kitty rescue. So the point is there's a number of organizations that actually were kind of left out and did not receive any kind of funding from the town through our allocation of federal funding. I'd be happy to answer any questions that council has regarding this proposed grant program.
Thank you, Grady. Any questions from anyone?
Just one.
Oh, yes, sir.
Is there a cap per organization on this?
It would only be a one-time, application only. So there would only be one disbursement totally not multiple applications for the same funding.
Correct. Is there a limit for each organization?
So when we did the small business assistance grants, I think they averaged $5,000. It would be very similar. So the award of this would probably be somewhere in between 5 and 10,000. The other thing to keep in mind too is my understanding is the nonprofits didn't have as many opportunities. For instance, when the county and the state received some of their money only went for business use and not nonprofits. And so a lot of the nonprofits have been hurt with lost revenue and subscriber bases and things like that. So I think this is a really good program and something that I think is really neat because we have this money that we can utilize in this way.
Any other questions? Questions or comments? Motion? Page 311.
Go ahead and move to approve staff creating, implementing one-time $300,000 grant program for Fountain Hills-based not-for-profit organizations negatively impacted by the pandemic and the associated budget transfer.
Thank you. Do we have any cards? I'm sorry. No. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We have two more items, similar. Consideration of the professional services agreement, and this first one is about medical services, emergency medical services.
If the council is pleased, I'll go ahead and address these together, and then we can have you consider them separately. Okay. So basically wanted to just remind the council that we had this discussion with the council at the retreat last year. We spend about $9.2 million annually for both police and fire services. It's the most expensive of the services the town provides to our residents, and certainly probably arguably is the most important that are provided in our community. One of the things that came up during the discussion about this with the council during the retreat is that it's very important from our standpoint to get a good handle on our long-term service delivery options and costs. These are very costly services, and in fact, we've seen in the case of law enforcement services, there's been some years where the services have increased in double digits. So with that, the cost that is recommended for the fire services is $40,000. The cost for the law enforcement is $79,000. The cost roughly is about 1% of the cost of providing those services. I also feel that on the fire side, part of what they'll be looking at is other service models. So they'll look at the possibility of continuing with a privatized fire delivery service like Rural Metro is currently providing. And they'll also look at the possibility of maybe contracting with another governmental entity, maybe with Scottsdale as an example. And they'll also look at the possibility of fire and emergency medical services being provided by the town. So we're a little bit probably in an easier position for that last option, only because we own all the fire apparatus and we own the stations. So, but anyways, that is what we would do on the fire side. On the police or the law enforcement side, be very similar, but they would also take into consideration, if we were to bring in police, what would be the startup costs? What would be the cost of the equipment, communications equipment, all the administrative support, all the things that go along with that. There's going to be, in my opinion, we're going to have them take a look at the current intergovernmental agreement with Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. I believe that there's some value with them doing that and seeing, since this particular company has done a lot of these, what we might be able to save between that on the contract costs, and also maybe help us with identifying staffing and what would be ideal. So, any case, these are two separate agreements before you. We did do a request for proposal. We only received on the police side, we received 2 proposals. On the fire side, we received 1. The same company that's being recommended for the fire contract submitted the second proposal for the police services. I highly recommend these agreements, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have at this time.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Grady, as you know, since day one, I've always said to you that I believe I don't know anything about being a fireman, so I can't comment on that. But in regards to the law enforcement review, I thoroughly looked that over. I'm somewhat concerned over the fact that they're very heavy in consultants, very light in actually sworn law enforcement officers that are in their organizational chart. So I would just ask you to, as you know, the purveyor of this and the overseer of it, to kind of pay particular attention. I could help you if you wanted to, if you wanted my assistance, but I just was a little bit concerned that reading all their resumes, they all have great college backgrounds and they're a lot of consultants, but they only have what I appear to be 2 people on staff that came from a sworn law enforcement position. And I'm a little leery about that, but I think if they were watched closely and the right questions were asked, they could overcome that.
And you bring up a really good point. But I will tell you one of the things about this particular firm versus the other one, which was a little bit more heavier with the law enforcement part of the team, was they have done a lot of these types of studies both in Arizona and also the Western United States. And part of this will also include informant interviews. So the council members will all, including yourself, will all be interviewed on the front end. There's also going to be a town hall style meeting just to try to seek public input. But back to your point about the evaluation of the services and your concerns about the lack of law enforcement based or backgrounds of the individuals. The staff and I had talked about maybe having an oversight committee, and I'd be happy to have you on to actually meet with the consultants at the kickoff, and then when they provide their preliminary findings and some of the recommendations for you to also be there with that oversight committee. Would that be something you'd be interested in? That'd be great then. I do think that this is going to be something that's really important. As you know, we hear this all the time from residents. Every year it seems like that we're spending so much money on law enforcement services and there's other better ways of doing this. So what I really feel like is we do get a good value for what we have. I know that right now we're in the process of trying to determine, and that's just about done. We'll be probably meeting with council soon on our current audit from MCSO. So we'll be coming back to you guys soon with the final results of that. But what I'm trying to get at is we hear from residents all the time that they think that there's better ways of doing things. So this report is going to be comprehensive and it'll be totally transparent to the public. With that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions the council may have.
We get a lot of grief as a council, not just this council, but all preceding councils, about the audits and the reports and the stuff that we pay outsiders to do. And I think it's really important to drive home. We need to rely on these professionals that do this and understand how these kinds of things work to come back to us with their opinion, as opposed to them putting me on the committee and us having a little subgroup and it all be based on personal opinion or what one of the residents tells us. I think these things are very important. And that being said, I do like the idea of offering up Councilman Spelich's time to help with a committee of some sort. And I know we're going to take a hit on this. I know it's going to happen. It happens every time we do some sort of study, but I think that it's very important so that we can go back and explain to them why we have the fire services or the police services the way that we do. Thank you.
Good point.
Thank you. Councilwoman, anything else?
Yeah, I just would add that I think it's important on these topics to have an objective, independent third party weighing in on both sides of this issue in terms of improvements we can make or changes or no changes. I mean, yes, again, it's just, I think it's money well spent to kind of put a definitive answer to some of this stuff that's been, broiling for years and years. And, there's a lot of history with, the fire district and then, blah, blah, blah. So I just think, in the marshal's department, there's just a lot of history here that a lot of people don't even realize is there. But I think it's good to get some definitive answers from an independent source, and it's will help us tremendously.
Thank you.
Very good. And do we have any speaker cards on this? So the first motion would be on page 325.
Move to approve professional services agreement 2022-043 with McGrath Consulting and the associated budget transfers.
I second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. And then we're going to do the other one separately, so where's that?
Is that
Yeah.
matrix?
360,
Yes.
yeah.
Move to approve professional services agreement 2022-046 with Matrix Consulting and the associated budget transfer.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Finally voted for a study.
Two.
See, you came to the right
Two
meeting.
studies.
Well, you came to the right meeting.
On the record.
Our last item is our usual council discussion, direction to town manager. We had a speaker that you acknowledged that you'll get back to, so take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Good night. Thank you so much.
That's okay. I'll make it all quick because I'm doing